Hello everyone. So, we'll be playing some wave levels today, and maybe polish alphabet as well. Yeah, and I haven't finished listening to this video yesterday in the previous episode, so we'll continue with from here on, and then we'll check that one, or rather this one that I was pointing at,
or the north, whatever direction we feeling like calling,
like
you
here.
know,
Yeah,
Europe and
yeah, sure.
you know.
I want to go back to the first
Let's
point that you
warm up
made
first.
about reducing identity to two things, race and sex, and you pointed out that if you're asked to write down a number of your most important identities, you might write musician, mother, you might identify with the sports team. I think there are a few things to say about this, especially the point that the two that we've landed on here are the ones that you don't choose. And that's that if you ask me to write down which identities are important to me, I'd probably, I don't think I'm going to write down my sex and my race. I think two critiques that people would make of that is firstly, that's because if you were to ask somebody which of their important identities do they cause them to suffer the most political inconvenience, then suddenly I don't think they would be writing things like their football team or the fact that they're a musician. And so in the conversation about politics and the conversation about justice, those identities just sort of don't become relevant. And so in the political arena, it kind of makes sense that those aren't the ones that are coming up, right? And the fact that you don't choose them maybe is the point. You said it's a sad way to look at things or something like that, but maybe it's just, as people see it, a sad reality of the world, that there are these factors which are outside of people's control, which are significant sources of their political unluckiness in a way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. You're giving a good definition of the concept of intersectionality, which when I first heard of, I thought, oh goody, somebody is actually acknowledging that our identities can be complex, but it's not. Okay, it's intersectionality is about the fact that we can have multiple identities that determine how we suffer or how we're discriminated against. And I just think, first of all, as a way of looking at anything, but certainly even the political world, I don't think that that's the way we want to define ourselves. Look, something that will come, has become increasingly relevant in the last few months. Defining, I'm Jewish, but I belong to the universalist tradition of Jewish thought, and it goes all the way back to the Bible, and most of the famous Jewish thinkers you've ever heard of are people who were in that tradition, okay, rather than a nationalist tradition. At the moment in Germany, as you may have read in Captain's of Guardian piece last week in which I was quoted, Germany has decided that part of their way of understanding tenets for their own history, what they've learned about Jews is they were our victims, and therefore Jews are always victims. We think of Jews in the category of victims and anti-Semitism, and we can't think of them in any other category. So someone like me who says, wait a sec, I don't just see myself as a victim at all, I see myself as an agent, and I actually see some Jews, particularly the present government of the State of Israel, as perpetrators, okay? That's a decision that I've made based on lots of knowledge and 5 years living in Tel Aviv and all kinds of things. What that means for me is, if you wanted, as certain people do, to reduce me to my ethnic heritage, I wouldn't be able to have a political opinion that goes against the racist nationalism of the present Israeli government. And I'm saying no, absolutely not. Sorry. what's most important to my identity is not the couple of genes that I may share with Benjamin Netanyahu, but the fact that, unlike him, I stand in the universalist tradition of Jewish thinking. And I think, lives are equally valuable,
deaths.
and I care about Palestinian lives as well as I care about Jewish ones. Okay?
All right.
So, you're taking away that possibility if you insist that I see myself primarily as a possible victim of anti-Semitism because Jews have been, have indeed
Classic.
been victimized over the years. And by the way, I know quite a number of friends of color who also absolutely reject the idea that dealing with racism means they should consider themselves permanent victims of racism, or people who had no privilege, okay, permanently underprivileged. I have quite a number of friends who reject that completely. In fact,
Yeah, I
I
need more
suppose
speed for now.
any person of color who I would consider a friend does reject that way
Let's
of
take a
looking at
break.
themselves and looking at these questions. It's just not those aren't the voices that get the loudest, get the most hearings, but there certainly are such voices.
Sure. I mean, I'm sort of imagining that the way that you were talking about primarily identifying yourself through the lens of your ethnicity or your race. I don't think that's a good idea either. And I know that critique is often made. People do, and oftentimes it does come from the woke bashing crowd. People who say, look, the problem with this is that people are reducing each other to their immutable characteristics, and that's a sad way to look at the world. But do you think that there's sort of a version of wokeness that can be put forward that says, well, obviously I'm not going to reduce you to your ethnicity, but what I'm saying is that this is something that's politically relevant in a way that those who say, race shouldn't be relevant at all and we should all be colorblind just sort of aren't getting, and so they wouldn't use the language of reducing you to that. They would just say that it is a lens that you need to look through sometimes on let's say certain issues.
Of course it is. I mean, it's ridiculous to call oneself colorblind. We're not colorblind, most of us. We see red. The sky is red or green if the leaves are green. So it's silly to say we don't see color, we don't see race. Of course we do. And I'm very much in favor of celebrating cultural differences as well. I think we're all enriched by the fact that we have cultural differences, and those, participating in other people's culture and stepping into it as far as one can is absolutely the best way to overcome this sense that there's an other and those are the only kinds of people you can have real connections with. So of course I'm not arguing for color blindness. I think that's ridiculous. I'm just saying that I have been in too many situations, and boy are they not just in universities, entire cultural institutions where the differences, what's focused on is really a reduction. I'll just say this. I can say this. I found out that this happened to me last night when I was in someone's mind paired with a Jewish writer in Germany with whom I have nothing in common, but nothing, okay? I mean, either politically or intellectually or in any possible way. But behind my back, it was said, these two go together, and read practically any page that I've written, and a page this person has written, and you would see the difference immediately, not to mention looking at our CVs or this or whatever, But because this thinking has become so, reductive thinking has become so automatic, it was just, they belong together. They're both Jews. Pretty strange. And these are not people who would ever consider themselves anti-Semites. On the contrary, these are people who are committed to fighting anti-Semitism, and yet they're still identifying people based the only thing that I would have in common with this person is ethnic identity. And I just see that happen all the time. I see it happen you know, if I'm asked, I know exactly when I'm being asked to give an interview or a talk because somebody's read something I've written and thinks it's interesting, and when I'm being invited because we need a woman, okay,
Mm.
which is insulting, first of all.
Mm.
Um, and
Of course.
secondly, you know, are we interchangeable? I mean, but there are many people who act as if that were the case, and
Yeah.
it all
I mean, the problem isn't perhaps the principal uh,
This one is much.
contradiction between wokeness and leftness that I think we're driving at here is something to do with tribalism, which is what you were talking about at the start of our conversation, right? And that wokeness is about identifying people with a form of tribe, be it their ethnicity or their sex. Left wing traditionally, at least in my country, have really been to do with class.
This
It's really
level
been to
is
do
much
with
tighter.
money, and
in
it's not so much the
Juggernaut
case anymore. But if
or
you
in
go
practice.
back a couple of decades and you ask somebody, you ask somebody whether they're on the left or the right, what you're really asking them is at least going to be probably correlated with their economic background. And the left is seen as fighting for the rights of the working class, and the right is
Alright,
seen
maybe
as
it's time to
fighting
finally check
for the rights of the elite.
what we've got
And that's how
here.
it's characterized. Now, at the time, I don't think people would have described this as a form of identity politics, if that
Oops.
word, it sort of existed back then. But it seems to me that arguably what's happened here is where the left has traditionally taken one aspect of a person's identity, which is their economic situation, which people did identify with, and
Let's see what we've
I guess
got.
it's more complicated as whether that's immutable or not, of course. But people were proud of being and are proud of being working class, but also identified as the most significant political factor determining who they vote for, and the biggest factor in how they're politically oppressed. Now, people do the same thing today, but they're talking about sex and they're talking about race. It doesn't seem to me obvious that there's some kind of category difference between doing these kinds of things. Maybe the difference is just a sort of factual one. Maybe we think that in the way that being working class was truly politically relevant, it turns out that what sex you are actually kind of isn't. Maybe that's one view. But
Right, I'm
it doesn't seem
tired.
to me that the sort of attitude towards taking an aspect of someone's identity, considering it politically relevant, and saying this is the lens that we look at politics through, has necessarily changed. But all the criticisms that you would make of people doing it with race and sex, I don't think you'd be, maybe you are, I'm not sure, probably not though as enthusiastic to levy that criticism against people who identify with the working class, for example.
I'm glad you asked that question. That's new because I actually am not a class reductionist either. Okay. And I call myself a socialist, but not a Marxist.
Right.
Now, you can say that Marx himself wasn't really a class reductionist and couldn't have been because, of course, neither he nor, and certainly not Engels, came from the working class. Okay. So there's a long discussion in Marx's theory about how much it's a matter of simply economic positioning and how much it's a matter of justice. But I would certainly say that for Friedrich Engels and for Karl Marx, it was a matter of justice plus a belief that because of the way conditions were in the mid to later 19th
Let's change the
century,
song
there was
and
this
try
idea
this.
that it would be the working classes that could be, as they put it, the universal class. Partly this is also the
Let's
result
maybe
of coming
like
from Hegel and so on. I don't
please pause for a second. I'm sorry, I can barely hear. No, this one. Alright, that is a cool song, but that's the one is. Oh, no, actually. Actually, yes. Yes. I love it. Alright, but there's nothing better than this. Alright.
Think those arguments
I
make
love
sense
it.
anymore. And I also think, as
Absolutely
in
love
the
it.
case of
Alright.
sex and ethnic background, I don't think they do justice to us. I mean, not only are class differences so very different than they were in even the beginning of the 20th century, they just changed radically. But I think even then, it was an impoverished way
This is
of
hard
looking
without
at
no
these
political.
questions, okay? So I agree with you entirely. I know that, I mean, in fact, there's an entire political party that was just formed in Germany that
No, I wanna play
began
this with no clip.
with a sense that I
First.
would agree with. That is for a this gendering that the Germans think you have to do with language, changing speech.
This is hard.
Exactly the opposite of the way that
This is
English
hard.
speakers do it. It's quite provincial, but you know, that for a retired woman who cannot pay her rent from her pension, you know, gender neutral language is not going to help her. Okay, so there's this new political party that just got started, but it's all we need only to focus on class. We need only to focus on economic questions. And I agree that I think we need to focus more on economic questions and more, in particular, on the incredible power of capital to undermine democratic institutions. So, by what it does with the media and you know, various other ways in which people are prevented from thinking for themselves about important political questions. So I think we need to think more about economics than we have. But I don't see that this classic everything would be fine if we only focused on class differences and got more economic equality. I don't think that's the answer either.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't think that it's the only pertinent political issue, but I wonder if you
God
would
damn it,
have the
this is
same
hard.
skepticism
This is
about
hard.
a form of identity politics that focuses on class rather than
Alright,
something like
let's-
sex and race,
I'm
for
not
example.
I'm not watching.
I'm not going to vote for this party. You know.
Yeah, sure. But
I'm gonna
would, I
change
mean,
the
would
color.
would you say that somebody who was identifying with the working class
Let's
in that
change it
kind of
to
way, in
this
the way that
one.
people do with sex and race, could be described as woke? Or because to me it seems like
Does anything
if somebody
change?
does that, if somebody says, yes, I'm
Not
working
really.
class and that's what I vote in accordance with, we can sit here and say, well, maybe that's an impoverished worldview or something. But I think it would be
This is-
probably wrong to say that that's not left wing. To say that, well, that's this wokeness thing that's not really in accordance with the values of the left.
Wait a second. No, this one. Good.
I would say, oh, okay, I see what you're saying, and I guess what I would say is, you're hanging on to a view of what's left. It wasn't even entirely true when Marx and Engels were writing about the working class, and it's certainly no longer true today. But yeah, one does sometimes get, it's funny, this is a conversation with a friend of mine recently, who I normally, really respect, who actually himself didn't come from really a working class family either, but was objecting to certain people who said, oh, they all have trust funds.
But wait, no,
And
I
I
don't
just
have
had to say, no,
portals
actually,
here.
They don't.
I made them
know
without
that-
portals.
I know
That's
that they
bad.
are. And even if they did, it wouldn't be an argument against them. But that is the kind of thing that one does sometimes hear.
Yeah, and
God
I
damn
mean,
it,
you were
no, no, no,
talking
no.
before about how
Good.
Marx and certainly Engels couldn't have been class reductionists because they didn't come from the working class. But in the modern sort of woke movement, you get the typical sort of woke white male. You know, the person who
No, it is the same.
makes a lot of noise about how people of color or women are oppressed, but they themselves don't belong to one of those categories. And it's a common character, right? And I suppose they could still be described as
Sorry. What? Yeah, let it be. Like, good. Are you for real? This is a pattern. This is a pattern. Oh my god.
maybe not reductionists exactly, but as doing the kind of thing that you're accusing woke people of doing here, despite not being members of that community themselves, right?
Yeah, sure. I run into it all the time. In fact, often the people who are most vociferous about doing what they think is defending, the rights of women or people of color are actually white men who are anxious to prove themselves, on the right side of history. And I think it's sad, frankly.
When you were talking about this list of identities that you would put forward, and you wouldn't, enthusiastically write down your race and your sex, I think some people listening would want to say, certainly with me, well, of course you're not going to do that because you're a white male, right? They can say, if you're writing down the things that are politically relevant, in the same way that if you ask somebody to write
What was that?
working class, that's really
Shit.
important to me as a political identity. Whereas if they've got a ton of money, and you ask them the same question,
God
they're
damn it,
probably
that's
not going to say,
incredible.
I've got lots of money.
Too
That's
bad
one of
there's
my
no
political
portals.
identities. In other words,
Kiddo.
it only becomes relevant when you're suffering because of it. And so, of course, I'm not going to identify with these factors.
Sorry about that. This is the last one. I'm fixing. Changing the song. I won't be doing that anymore. We'll be listening to intellectuals without pausing. maybe like this. Yes. I'm a guy.
Politically speaking, but that's because of who I am.
Let's
Believe it
go
or
into
not,
some
the
extreme humans.
wealthiest person I know, someone who's extremely wealthy,
Shall we?
suffers. It was actually good to
Oh
become
no,
friends
those
with
fucking
someone
small
who was
words.
wealthy beyond anything I could imagine in my own life, because I stopped, wishing for large amounts of money. So, I can imagine somebody who really had lots of money. There might be it's bad taste to say it, but I can certainly, I'm thinking of somebody,
Huh?
certainly imagine someone saying that was a gigantic part of his identity and something that influenced his life in notable ways. I mean, I'm not sure what kind of a reaction you want me to give. So I get to, I feel like I've been on both sides of these lines, because I've had a peculiar, complicated life in a number of countries. Okay, now in the U.S., possibly in England, but certainly in the U.S. Yeah, I'm a woman, so that gives me victim points, if that's what I want. I don't, by the way. But I code as white, so I'm kind of, a little funny that way. By the way, growing up as a child in the American South, Jews did not count as white. So, I grew up with that experience. But in Germany, of course, being a woman is a victim point, and being a Jew is a victim point, even if I don't want it. So I feel like I've been on both sides of this line, because I've lived and worked for such a long time in actually 3 different countries, but primarily 2. And I don't know why anyone would want to continue to insist on it. Is it the case that I would not want a friend of color to, say, go jogging in certain parts of the United States? Yes, that's the case. I also, as a woman, wouldn't go walking in certain parts of the United States. But am I denying that there's discrimination to the point of there being danger? That is, that black men, say, running through certain neighborhoods in the United States run a real risk of getting shot? Yes, okay. Or that women run real risks of getting raped? Sure. But I don't, and most of the people,
I forgot.
really all of the people that I admire and respect, don't want our lives to be reduced to those facts. We
Yeah, and
like to do something about those facts, but we don't feel that they have to be absolutely central to our lives.
So I understand what you're saying here. When it comes to those particular issues, which will be political insofar as, you know, we need to have discussions about how to police them, for example. Are those examples of times when it does make sense to at least sometimes look through the lens of something like race or sex in that? Because, you know, if anything, it's a useful tactic to help people understand the problem that they haven't experienced themselves, right? To try and look through this lens.
I will go one further. I will say it's crucial for white people to look through the lens of race, to read some
Alright,
books,
4893.
okay, written by black
This one is really
authors
simple.
that, you know, give us a window into what that's like, to get to know some people of color and actually discuss what that's
How
like.
long is the
Oh,
session?
and also, by the way, it's
Alright,
amazing how many men don't read books written by women. You know, it's extraordinary. They've actually done some studies of this, okay? And that includes some of the greatest books that were ever written. Men just don't pick them up because, you know, hey, it's a girl's book, it's a woman's book, okay?
Yeah, well, famously, J.K. Rowling was J.K. because the publishers were worried that if it said Joanne on the front, people wouldn't buy the book.
And George Eliot, long before her, was also George Eliot for exactly the same reason.
I forgot.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And she is, you know, she was considered the greatest English language author of the 19th century. I would give her the 20th and so far the 21st as well. I just think she's one of the greatest writers that ever lived, okay? So of course, it's important for us to actually one of the things that shows
It's aligned
Eliot's
so
greatness
poorly.
is that she was incredibly able to portray men
No,
and the
actually,
different kinds of things that move men in a society as rigidly constructed as the one she was living with. You know, she paints incredibly insightful, intimate portraits of men as
actually,
well
the
as women.
problem is.
So, you know, of course, we should sometimes look at the world through those lenses. We just shouldn't stop there.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about was something I heard you say in a talk. One of your colleagues, I think, said
Actually,
the phrase,
problem is not
the left police language as the right police values. Do you think that's true, and what does it mean?
I didn't say
the problem
that.
is
That's
that
an
orbs are fucking
interesting-
small, tiny.
Somebody might have said that to me in a discussion.
For some reason.
I mean,
I think you were quoting something someone had said to you, but it might have been from a while ago.
okay, because I don't remember it. I mean, my reaction to that would be, yeah, that looks like it's the case. The problem is that the right has such a hard time of actually maintaining the values it claims to police that they're not very believable. I mean, you know, look at your government, look at, you know, Trump and his people. I mean, these are people who
These are goons.
I mean, the thing that of course makes Britain better than the United States is the way that it was able to actually send Boris packing, because it was just so clear that he'd violated a basic value of decency and honesty that was still in some sense being maintained even by his own party, a conservative party. But, you know, the problem with the right claiming to police values is it would be fine if they actually lived up to them themselves, but they so very often don't.
They're so fucking small.
And another question I think people are really going to want to ask is, and maybe the answer's already been given implicitly through what we've been talking about, but to make it plain, I mean, whatever problems the left is currently suffering, either reputationally with its association with wokeness, or actually in principle as people who are on the left, you know, become more woke, for want of a better term. What practical steps can we take to bring the left back into focus as it should be defined, and to disassociate it with this woke stuff?
Well, you know, I wrote this book to
The
encourage
orbs
people
being
to
so
think
small.
about these things for beginning. Because I actually think that as soon as you start realizing how many reactionary assumptions you're taking for granted, you switch. Okay? And that's what I'd like to leave people with. I get the intentions. I get the good intentions in the work. Okay? And the work I'm not viewing, contrary to people on the right, I'm not viewing the woke as the enemy. On the contrary, I'm arguing that some of the battles that the woke have been having over language, over purity, over who's allowed to speak, have done damage to the left. I know lots of people who won't say it out loud, but who feel politically homeless because they've gone to meetings where it's, they've been considered not ideologically pure enough. And we are facing incredible dangers right now. People worry about the inflation of the term fascism, but as a friend of mine who's an Indian historian says, if we wait till the big concentration camps to call things by their proper name, it will be too late to do anything about it. So you really see rising in most of the world, and as people know, we have something like 65% of the world is voting in this year, and very far-right parties are doing extremely well. They
Too
meet,
bad.
they come together, they share strategies. Steve
Alright, we'll
Bannon
be just
invites
playing
them
from
all to
zero.
a castle in Italy. I mean, those are the European ones, but the non-European ones meet as
I
well.
guess.
And it's tragic and dangerous that people on the left who basically share similar goals tear each other up over questions of ideological purity. So I think once we see the dangers, we can realize that a certain kind of symbolic politics is absolutely nothing compared to the kinds of real dangers that we're facing. Not to mention the climate crisis. That is, the climate crisis is only going to be resolved on an international basis if people stop thinking in tribalist terms and begin thinking in universalist terms. And these two dangers, the danger of proto-fascism and the danger of the climate crisis, are things that can only be faced if we pull back and unite as a popular front, irrespective of smaller differences.
Well, Susan Neiman, thank you for taking the time. Thanks for your insights, and I will make sure that the book is linked in the show notes for everybody who wants to go and read it. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been fun.
Thanks very much, Alex.
If you enjoyed that conversation, you can watch more episodes of the Within Reason podcast by clicking just here.
Yeah, that was kind of friendly, but it was not bad. Like, why not? Should people not be rambly from time to time? They should have the time to ramble when they want to. Even when it's considered something serious or formal. Although this podcast Within Reason, it's only partially formal. First of all, I understand that Alex wants his interlocutors, I'm not sure. People he talks to, he wants them to feel comfortable. And that's good when they do. Even if they get rambly. Anyways, let's go here now.
Robert Sapolsky, welcome to Within Reason.
Thanks for having me on.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, just how bored are you of people making jokes about free will to the effect of whenever you do anything they say, hey, it's not your fault, you couldn't help it?
Oh, I don't know. I've been telling people for a long, long time that I don't think there's any free will, so I've been hearing that as a response for a long time, so by now it has sort of a sentimental nostalgia, so that's good.
Sure. Well, I mean, although what we're talking about today really isn't any kind of joke, I can understand why to somebody who hasn't really thought about it before that much, it might sound like one. I mean, your most recent book, Determined, is essentially an attack, a philosophical attack, on what might be considered one of the most fundamental elements of being a human, of being alive, of being a conscious agent, and that is our ability to make choices. It's something that I've spoken about on my YouTube channel before. So I think that people listening will probably have a vague idea of the arguments surrounding the existence or non-existence of free will, but your book kind of takes two parts. There's the part one, here's the bad news, and then there's the part two of here's what we can do about it, or here's how we might respond to this realization that there is no freedom. So I think it would be worth going over the first part just a little bit, because everybody has a slightly different approach to arguing why there is no free will. There are lots of different ways to do it, but hopefully we can jump into the second part fairly quickly. So you can make an argument against free will from neuroscience, from physics, about particles bumping into each other, from just abstract philosophy about the way that thinking works. What approach do you take, and why?
Well, I am pitifully unschooled in both philosophy and physics, so I'm coming at it from my profession, which is I'm a biologist. I'm mostly a neuroscientist, but the fact that I'm not entirely one I think is very pertinent to all of this, because what I spend my time thinking about is when a human, a primate, when somebody does a behavior, we ask, why'd they do that? Where did that come from? Why did that just occur? And what is scientifically sort of clear to me by now is that's a whole hierarchy of questions. Why did that occur? You're asking which parts of the brain did or didn't do something in the last half second, but you're also asking something about the sensory stimuli for that individual in the prior minutes. Were they terrified? Were they stressed? Were they aroused? Were they hungry, sleepy, whatever? Because that's going to affect how your brain is responding to stuff. But you're also asking, what about your hormone levels this morning? Because that's going to have been shaping how sensitive your brain was to various environmental stimuli. What were your last years like in terms of trauma, finding love, finding God, whatever? Because as the backbone of this whole field, neuroplasticity, you will get major changes in brain function and structure in response to experience like that. And then you're off to your usual suspects: adolescence, childhood, fetal life, your genes. Amazingly, you also have to consider what kind of culture your ancestors came up with, parentheses, what kind of ecosystems they were living in, because that had a ton to do with it. What does that have to do with any of this? Because within minutes of birth, the culture in which your mother was raised will influence her mothering style.
I cannot believe this.
So why did that person just do what they did? Because of everything from 1 second ago to millennia ago, all of these influences. And when you look at them, there's two key punchlines. The first one is when you look at sort of the amount of our behavior that all of those prior events encompass, what you conclude is we are nothing more than the sum of our biological luck, over which we had no control, and its interactions with the sum of our environmental luck, which we also had no control over. The second key point with that, which really does in free will for me, is it's not a punchline here of, oh, you got to keep in mind a whole bunch of different scientific disciplines, because maybe neuroscience doesn't disprove free will, but endocrinology does, or that doesn't disprove but genetics, or physiological ecology, or any. No, the key point is all of these different disciplinary approaches turn into the same thing. What do I mean by that? You're talking about genes and behavior. If you're doing that, by definition, you're talking about millions of years of evolution of your genes. And you're also talking about what your childhood was like, when experiences then were causing lifelong epigenetic changes in your gene regulation. And you're also talking about what proteins your brain were making on the direction of your genes 25 minutes ago. And when you look at how it forms this one continuous arc of influences, My two cents is there's not a crack anywhere in that edifice in which you could shoehorn in free will.
Tell me about the hungry judge phenomenon.
Oh, I love this one. This one is in the realm of like what's been going on in the previous hours.
What?
And this was this classic study published in a very prestigious journal looking at all of the parole board decisions that were made in a particular country over the course of a year, and hundreds, possibly thousands, I'm forgetting. And, you know, at each juncture, a judge either let somebody go free or sent them back to jail. And the scientists looking for what were the predictors of the decision. And they found, like, the single most powerful one was how many hours it had been since the judge had eaten a meal. See a judge right after they had lunch, you had about a 60% chance of parole. By 3-4 hours later, essentially a 0% chance. Whoa, what is that about? That's totally bizarre. That makes total biological sense because, like, the part of your brain that is required
I heard
to
about
think
that
about
before.
the world from somebody else's perspective.
That's really miserable.
To challenge your immediate snap judgments a second time, a fifth time, a 10th time. It's part of the brain. The frontal cortex is the most expensive part of your brain metabolically. When it's been hours since you've eaten, your blood sugar levels are low, and what's one of the first parts of the brain that's beginning to get a little sluggish as a response? This part of the brain, and it's easier to default into a quick snap judgment. And you know, the neurometabolism of that occurring is like pretty straightforward. What's astounding to me is the knowledge that you take any one of those judges and say, whoa, this is interesting. Remember back right after lunch, you had a guy who had done X and you paroled him? And just now this person seemed to have done the exact same thing, but you sent them back to jail.
No.
What's the deal with that? They're not going to say, because my frontal metabolism decreased. They're going to cite some college course on Immanuel Kant or something that will fill in an attribution when it's metabolic. Okay, it must be said, that study got a lot of attention, and it got a few different groups challenging its statistics, its interpretation. It is totally, utterly held up solid and has been in effect replicated. You do not want to ask for a home mortgage loan at the bank if it's been hours since the person you're talking to has eaten a meal, all sorts of versions like that. When people are hungry, when they're sleep deprived, they become less generous. They become less cooperative. They're more likely to stab you in the back if you're playing an economic game with them. So just on that level, wow, when you had lunch is going to have a major impact on whether or not, like, you're going to send this person back to jail or not. Yeah, there's machinery humming underneath the surface all the time.
And this, when you say this is the biggest predictor of the parole decision that the judge makes, is this bigger than political affiliation, bigger than the kind of schooling that the judge has? This is really the biggest factor that we can use to determine or to take a guess at what their decision is going to be.
Well, it's after controlling for, like, neurological modulators. What is the person from the same in-group that you are? What's your, who appointed you? Things of that sort. It was Middle Eastern country, so some specifics to their sort of criminal justice system. But yeah, of the extraneous, this couldn't possibly have something to do with how judges make their decisions list. This was at the top of the list.
It's fascinating because, well, especially because most people intuitively know this to some degree, right? If you're having an argument with somebody, you might think to yourself, gosh, maybe I'm just hungry or hangry, maybe I'm tired. You say, well, let's revisit this in the morning. I need to sleep on it. You know, people are already aware that to some degree, there are moments in our lives where the decisions that we make seem to be out of accord with our own agency. So when asking, you know, whether we have free will, everybody's going to agree that there are certain circumstances where we have less free will or more free will. There are certain times when our free will is diminished. And I suppose when the question is asked, well, where do we draw the line as to how far that can go, how far that free will can be removed, your answer seems to be that there is no line.
Yeah, these are nice liberal reformist edge cases. Oh, we all have free will, but some of the time all of us have less than at other times, and some people really have way less than other people. My stance, and I'm way out in the lunatic fringe on
Not
this in
bad.
terms of sort of neuroscience, even, is that there's no free will whatsoever. That there's all sorts of points where we think we're
Let's get
seeing
back.
it, because we're looking in the wrong place, we're having a very strong emotional pull towards seeing it, but that there actually is none whatsoever when you look at the cumulative ways in which
Oops.
you turned out to be who you are, and how what came before determined
What?
that there is none. That's all we are. We are the outcome of the biological environmental luck that started way back when, up to a second ago, and there's no me inside there, inside your brain, that's in your brain but not of your brain, and it's made of something separate, and that somehow is immune to things like your blood glucose levels, or your genes, or what culture you were brought up in, or whether you're worrying about paying the month's rent, and that's like the main thing in your mind. There is no separate me in there.
What?
Now, people are going to want to separate out the micro from the macro here. You know, they're going to want to say, okay, if it gets cold, that will be a determining factor in me putting my coat on. I'll go and put a jacket on, and clearly, you know, that's somewhat out of my control because I don't control the temperature. But that's not going to determine whether I put my left arm through first or my right arm through first. You know, like those minute decisions that seem to be almost trivial. It's almost as if even if you went looking for some kind of determinant factor as to why you do the left arm rather than the right arm, it seems ridiculous to say that that decision might have something to do with, you know, your ancestors or the how recently you ate, or any of these kinds of factors. So what's a good way of explaining the loss of agency in the minute decisions like that, where there doesn't seem to be, even to the person, a sort of a rational or an obvious
Right.
non-rational reason for one or the other?
Well, let's unpack that a bit. So you get some college freshman who's volunteered for a psych experiment, and they show up, and the experiment is, here's a button, and whenever you feel like it, push it, and you can push it with your right hand or your left hand, and just go for it. And thus we're in this micro world. So first off, is this person left-handed or right-handed? That's a biological phenomenon. Does this person happen to have a sore shoulder on their right side, not their left? Whatever it is. So that. But then you're sitting there, and this is a psych
No,
experiment.
this is
You're
so
wondering,
dumb.
what do they really want to know about this? You
Uh,
start generating a hypothesis. What is it that they're looking for? You're having a meta level of, you're saying, well, I just did my left hand 3 times in a row. Is that indicative? Okay, let me do right next time. Then you're wondering if you saw it and you thought you
Where
saw
can
like
even
a
possibly
micro
die
expression
here?
of a smile on the researcher's face, that aha, their theory was just, are you a jerk at that point, saying, okay, I know what they're up to, I'm going to do just the opposite? How do you turn out to be, first off, the sort of person who would be in university and sign up for a psych experiment, and the sort of person who would show up on time?
No.
And how do you be the sort of person who was or wasn't generating hypotheses as to what are they
I
looking
love
for
Robert
here? And do I
Sapolsky.
want to confirm that?
I haven't
Are they
listened to him
appealing? Am I
before.
going to try to do what I
Not
think they
really.
want me to do? Or am I going to do the opposite because I'd love
He's
to
a
show
pattern
them that I'm
recognition
smarter
machine,
than
just
they
like
are
I
because
am.
of my authority issues? Like, just unpacking even something as like trivial as that is going to have a little bit of this viscosity coming from
Why are
everything that came before
these
that
orbs
made
like that?
Well,
you.
people often like to ask me about, there's a French philosopher whose name I don't know if I pronounced correctly, but this concept of Buridan, is it Buridan? Buridan? But his donkey, or his arse, and this idea of a donkey stood behind two haystacks, and it's hungry, and it needs to eat from one or the other, but because the donkey has literally no reason to pick one haystack over the other, it stands in the middle and ends up starving to death, because any reason to go for one or the other doesn't materialize. And yet to go for one or the other, you need some reason. And I had someone ask me about this recently. I was speaking at a school, and this young guy comes up to me and he asks me about this situation, and the way that I tried to explain it to him was to say, the two options you have are that either there is some determining factor that makes the donkey go for stack A or stack B, or there's literally no determining factor. Now, granting that the donkey probably does something, right? So let's say it goes for stack A. If there was some determining factor, then that's what we're talking about here. You have to ask what brought about that determining factor, and it's probably outside of the donkey's control. But even if it were the case that there really were zero determining factors, and the donkey genuinely randomly picks stack A, the definition of randomness entails that you're not in control of that either. A lot of people like to think that the place you can shoehorn in free will, as you say, is by looking towards elements of randomness in the universe, perhaps at the quantum level, but oftentimes I think forgetting that randomness means that there's no determining factor, which means that you can't be the determining factor, so that must be outside of your control too. But I wonder how you would account for this situation of the donkey between the two haystacks, and what might be going on in its mind.
Well, randomness is a very tricky thing in all this. First off is the, like, holy grail or, like, deepest hole into purgatory of any of this, which is quantum indeterminacy. And does that actually mean the whole universe is indeterministic? And is there a way to harness indeterminacy to get, like, free will and all? And in the book I spent 2 chapters on this, that essentially quantum indeterminacy has nothing to do with any of this for 3 reasons. The first is the subatomic scale. It's so many orders of magnitude that these effects will have to bubble upward. And in such synchrony among all the different subatomic events going on in one molecule at a time, let alone one region of the brain, that it's beyond impossible for that to occur. The second one is exactly what you allude to, which is if by some chance it did bubble all the way up to affect the function of a neuron or a part of the brain or whatever, as you say, it's a prescription for randomness. And God help you if, say, you're attributing, say, your moral philosophy to randomness, and every free will believer and free will skeptic, except for a weird sort of subgroup there, agree that randomness is not like the basis for free will. It's just as incompatible as extreme determinism. The third one is then this sort of desperate Hail Mary that people often grab for at that point, which is somehow harness that randomness in some way, higher level brain function, the you that's supposed to be separate in there, in some way is able to reach down a form of downward causality that philosophers basically think can't exist, in order to opportunize that randomness for your own, like, free will pleasure stuff, and there's no mechanism for it that works. That said, when you look at the brain, neurons do random things. Neurons will randomly dump little packets of neurotransmitters. Neurons will randomly have action potentials now and then. And you ask the same question, is this like the fodder for your, like, moral philosophy kind of thing? Very unlikely. And the randomness turns out not to be all that random. For example, so you
this
got,
level is not that hard. I'm not sure which one is the hardest.
They talk to other neurons by
but
way
this
of
one
these
is kind
little
of beatable.
fibrous end things called axon terminals that have little packets of neurotransmitters in them. And when the first neuron gets excited, it dumps those neurotransmitter packet out into the space, which floats over to the next neuron and gets it excited. And occasionally you see neurons that will just spontaneously dump their neurotransmitters out of their little packets. Whoa, randomness, all of that. Randomness as in, well, there's the usual machinery for dumping neurotransmitter when you want to, and it's incredibly complicated and has produced a couple of Nobel Prizes. So, like, somebody is not looking at the control panel when they should be inside that neuron, and like something slips by and you accidentally activate the dump the neurotransmitter mechanisms. Oh, it's just a hiccup in the system.
Yeah, I know what happened.
No,
Sure.
it turns out spontaneous neurotransmitter release has a completely different mechanistic pathway for doing it. You evolve a capacity for spontaneous release. And then you look more closely, and it turns out there's certain times when these random events occur in your brain more often than others, different physiological states. In other words, there are points where your brain determines it's time to be indeterministic for a bit. That sure is not free will. That's as much free will as like you take an improv theater class and you sit there and the teacher tells you, okay, so now we're going to start the scene. Go for it. That teacher has determined that you are going to be indeterministic now along some parameters. Even looking at that level, there's no actual randomness happening there, and there's no means by which true randomness is the way in which you turn out to be, a fundamentalist Baptist or a Tibetan Buddhist or a nihilist or whatever. It's just not the building blocks that you can use to generate that.
So, no freedom, no agency, no ultimate control over our actions. That's the situation we find ourselves in. And I want to talk about how we should react to this. But just beforehand, one more example. Who's this guy that got the pole through his skull and it totally changed his behavioral traits?
Phineas Gage. Every neuroscientist, while they're still in the crib, is forced to hear the story of Phineas Gage because it's ground zero for neuroscientists having something useful to say about free will. 1840s, Phineas Gage was working on a railroad construction line. Somebody screwed up something with some dynamite and did what they weren't supposed to do, and it blew a 3-foot-long, 13-pound metal rod when it exploded into Gage's eye and out the top of his head, his forehead, and in the process landing 13 feet over from there. In the process, it also took out his frontal cortex, which was nicely splattered all over the acreage there. So Gage just had
it went all the way through and came out the other side.
Yes. And if you ever find yourself at Harvard's medical school and go into their library, they have Phineas Gage's skull is on display there, and you could see the entry point and the exit point, and the pole that's on display there also.
Whoa.
Gage gets up, which is amazing in and of itself.
Wow.
This thing went through at sufficiently high speed that it cauterized every blood vessel, and he stands there, and he and some of his construction crew compatriots go into town where a doctor looks in the empty space there and diagnoses things, saying you have a hole in your brain there. And as epically described as Gage was no longer Gage, he had a massive transformation in his personality. He was the foreman of this railroad construction crew. He was the sober, God-fearing, church-attending, sobrietous, reliable, self-disciplined guy. And literally overnight, he was turned into this foul-mouthed, profane, disinhibited guy who wasn't able to work for years and years afterward. Gage was no longer Gage. And this was the first very unsubtle example that material stuff inside your head is essential to what makes us us. And, Gage is a simple case. Wow, here's Gage who, 2 years later,
I'm
cursing
dying
loudly
here all the
in
time.
church, blaspheming, all of that.
I wonder
Why
how
did he
long
do
I have
that?
to rest.
It's easy to see because there was a metal rod's worth of explanation because of that accident that happened to him. That's why. That one's easy for us to look at and say, oh, he had no control over that. That this part of the brain was damaged. Where we really have trouble is not when it is something as much of a sledgehammer as a metal rod, but having to deal with the fact that who each of us are. Why did each of us just do what we did, sitting there in church or in any such what? Because of a million, zillion, gazillion microscopic little threads from the past that sculpted us into who we are. And the thing is, it's easy to see the single sledgehammer that made Gage, and it's so much harder for us to accept that you put all those zillion microscopic threads of your past together, and it is going to be as powerful as a metal rod blasting through your head. It's just harder to see distributed causality. A lot of it we don't even know about yet how it works. A lot of it is just probabilistic.
So I have 22 here.
Put all those threads together, and
I have 21 here.
there's
That will be the
nothing
next
but
one.
the conclusion that you
I
are
have
nothing
25
more
here and
than
37
everything
there.
that came before that turned you into the sort of person that you are right now. And sometimes it's easy to see how that happened. A metal rod, childhood poverty, trauma, whatever, being raised in
Can I
enormous
do this
privilege.
quickly?
And sometimes it's these little threads going back to like your hunter-gatherer ancestors inventing their culture versus your agriculturalist ancestors and everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, we know that the environment of our distant ancestors can affect our behavioral traits today. I mean, you can predict. There are studies to show this, if I'm not mistaken. You can predict how somebody will behave
I'm
in a
too
given
fast.
scenario based on the kind of environment that their ancestors thousands of years ago were living in.
Absolutely. You see contrasts between, say, child-rearing practices in collectivist versus individualist cultures. You see completely different attitudes towards social norm violations in people who were raised in cultures of honor. Cultures of honor, your ancestors were cow people or camel people or goat people, nomadic pastoralists, where if somebody affronts you, you come back and you flatten them with 10 times the retribution, because if they take your camel today and you do nothing about it, tomorrow they're going to take the rest of your camels and your children as well, or something. And you see different physiology in people raised in cultures of honor going back generations. The last time that was relative, where folks were making a living, and that leaves imprints. People from rainforest cultures are far more likely to invent polytheistic religions. People from deserts are more likely than chance to invent monotheistic. So, whoa, that's part of it as well. Yeah. Mothers who grew up in collectivist cultures, typically Southeast Asian rice-growing regions, versus individualist culture mothers, typically United States, sort of the poster child for that. On the average, they sing lullabies at different volumes. Individualist culture mothers, on the average, sing lullabies more loudly than collectivist. On the average, they wait a longer time to pick up their kid when their kid's crying than collectivist mothers. At what age is the kid weaned? At what age is the kid sleeping alone? Oh, whoa, from minutes after birth. Like, that's already beginning to shape how your brain's being constructed.
Can't you just know you can't?
So you put all those pieces together, and this kind of taps into the domain where I think people make their most fundamental, most intuitive, mistaken perception of free will, which is we make choices. We sit in some split in the road, and we form an intent to do X instead of Y. We form that intent. We know that we have that intent. We know what the outcome of that is likely to be. Most importantly, we know nobody's forcing us to do that. We've got alternatives available to us. And for most people who think about free will, and people in the criminal justice system who think about free will, is if you had a conscious intent and you knew what the outcome was likely to be and you knew you didn't have to do it, that's it. Case closed. Culpability, responsibility. We're done with our trial. And for me, this is 40 years of people fighting about the neurobiology of the milliseconds of intent. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the free will debate. because it doesn't ask the only question you can ask at that point,
What?
which is, oh yeah, how do you become the sort of person who would have that intent at that moment? And you became that sort of person because of what was happening in your neurons a second ago and what was happening a year ago and what your ancestors and everything in between. And simply looking at from the moment you form an intent and then consciously choose to act on it is like trying to figure out what a book is about by only reading the last sentence of the entire book. All of the important stuff is
My
coming
finger
how did
refused.
you become that sort of person? And you became that sort of person because of biological and environmental factors which collectively you had no control over, and that's why you became you.
Now, crucially, when we
That
spoke
was
about
a powerful
the
flick.
gauge example with the pole through his head, and he shows up
So the
and
next
suddenly
biggest
he's
one
quite a nasty person
is
by
still
all
this
accounts.
one.
I think people would intuitively look at him and say, well,
Let's
okay,
try
yeah, he's
again.
turned into, a bit of a jerk, but it's not his fault. There's kind of a sense in which you might feel sorry for him, because even though, yeah, he might say profane things about the God that you believe in now, and that he seemingly believed in, at least yesterday, look, he had a pole through his head, so let him
shit.
off. Now, if you're right that all human behaviour is a result of a similarly
What?
sort of a process that's similar in the sense that you don't have control
What?
over it, then this leads to quite a radical conclusion that we should probably adopt the same approach to essentially anybody doing anything any of the time. Is that your position?
Exactly. That's the only logical extension. It's the only intellectually honest and ethically honest conclusion to reach, which is this completely nutty stance that blame and punishment as virtues in and of themselves rather than as instrumental tools, blame and punishment never make any sense whatsoever
That is
in
true.
any realm of human life.
Yeah.
And holding a mirror up to that, likewise, praise and reward never make any sense whatsoever, because that's the circumstance in which some people are treated better than average for reasons they had nothing to do with, as opposed to the world of people being treated worse than average for reasons that blame,
Danny.
punishment, reward, praise, a
26,
sense of
and this one
entitlement, a
was
sense that you have earned
this one
anything,
25
a
alright.
sense that hating a person is ever justified. None of those make any sense whatsoever. And in principle, you need to run the world without any of that stuff, which ain't a trivial task to take on.
Now, it sounds really nice when framed in terms of, look, if something goes wrong for you, it's not exactly your fault. If somebody has things better in life, it's we should take an egalitarian approach to recognizing that it's not necessarily due to merit, but we should be sort of considerate of the fact that there go I, where it for the grace of God. However, you can also frame it in terms of saying that when I achieve something, when I win a competition, when I'm nice to someone in the street, there's no sense in which I should be able to feel proud of myself if that's the case. And on a deeper level, getting rid of agency doesn't just get rid of this ability to feel, I suppose, proud or to condemn other people, morally speaking. It removes part of what I think many people think it means to be human. And so I get a lot of emails from people saying, look, it's really interesting stuff about free will. You've convinced me that there's no free will, but I don't really know what to do now. And I never quite know what to say to them. And I imagine that you're in a similar situation where you're kind of asked in a broad sense, does this kind of position just lead to a sort of nihilism? And if it does, should it?
Yeah. Now we're getting into sort of the really problematic stuff, because as you described, you tell somebody there's no free will and you manage to sound convincing with that, and even before the nihilism existential void, the usual reflexive stuff is, oh my god, you can't tell people that, they'll run amok. There's a whole
This
science as to
fucking
why that is
click. Oh
very
my
unlikely
god,
to
it's
happen.
so bad.
Oh my god, we'll have no societal mechanisms to keep murderers off the street. That's absurd. Over and over and over, we are able to protect society from dangerous circumstances and subtract responsibility out in the process. Oh my god, if you get rid of meritocracies, you get a brain tumor and you're going to pick a random person off the street to do the brain surgery on you. Same thing. No, we can subtract praise and entitlement and meritocracy and still protect society from incompetent people doing important stuff. Oh my god, are you saying nothing can ever change? Not in the slightest. The whole universe of how change works completely compatible with there being no free will. So you get through all of those sources of panic, and then there's the, oh my god, the existential void. Are you telling me that, like, the ways in which I have worked hard, I've earned nothing from them? That had nothing to do with me? Are you telling me I love my wife? We've been married for 34 years now to 2024. That's right, 34.
Alright.
And nonetheless, sitting there saying, oh my god, do I love her in part because of the type of oxytocin receptor genes I have? Because of her pheromones or things like that? What does that do to love? What does that do to accomplishment? What does that do to any of this stuff? If you're a kind person, do you actually deserve no praise for that? And yeah, that's where the nihilistic void suddenly beckons, and it's
I'm dumb.
potentially
I could have flipped this to
depressing as
100.
hell.
I just clicked
And
because I forgot what to
what
do.
took me forever to figure out
Oh, dummy,
is that
dummy,
that's
dummy,
not,
dummy,
at the
dummy.
end of the day, a problem,
Dumb, dumb, dumb,
or
dumb.
a problem on the scale of the whole world. You're bummed out because if there's no free will, you didn't deserve your prestigious university degree. You didn't deserve your excellent salary, your corner office. You didn't deserve the fact that people love you and respect you. You didn't deserve the fact that you were able to help people and out of kindness. You didn't deserve any of the praise for that, any of the sense of entitlement, all of that. Bummer, bummer. And my critical
My
point there
attempts
is,
560.
if that's the
That could have been it.
stuff that there being no free will means
Let's
to you,
quickly.
you're one of the lucky humans, because you're trying to figure out what it means that you may not deserve to be the CEO of your
forgot.
corporation, or you may not really have earned love by being a kind
forgot.
person, or any of those. If that's your problem, you're one of the lucky ones. For the vast majority of people on this planet, the issue isn't, oh my god, maybe I
It's a
don't
debuffer.
deserve to have been treated better than average because I really wasn't responsible for the things that I'm like treated well for.
Fuck.
For most people, the problem is that we have a world in which we're perfectly happy to treat people worse than average for reasons they had no control over. And for most people, like, getting rid of free will is a wonderful thing. It makes the world more humane. Here's one example that is like so obvious that it's hard to frame in terms of the free will issue, but like at some point 400 years ago, most Western cultures figured out that people don't have the free will, don't have the power to control the weather. And as such, if there's a horrible thunderstorm that destroys everyone's crops, it wasn't caused by the old lady with no teeth at the edge of the hamlet that nobody talks to.
Fuck.
Witchcraft doesn't work. You can't do
Oh my
witchcraft to
god.
control the weather. They don't have responsibility over that. And as a result, there is a change in how we did criminal justice. You don't burn old ladies at the stake anymore when the weather turns bad because they didn't actually have control over that. And it's a much better world that we don't burn people at the stake now when the weather turns bad. It's a much better world that we figured out about 2 centuries ago that an epileptic seizure is a neurological disorder. It's not a sign that somebody is demonically possessed. It's a much better world that in the last 40 years or so we figured out that, say, schizophrenia is a neurogenetic disorder.
So which one was I
rather
supposed to
than
play?
it is
This one,
caused
right?
by psychodynamically toxic mothers who secretly hated their child and made them schizophrenic. It's a great thing we figured out that, like, some kids have trouble learning to read, not because they're lazy or unsmart, but they have like architectural abnormalities in one part of their cortex, and they tend to reverse letters. They have dyslexia. It's a much better world in all those places that we have subtracted a perception of free will out where there is
Fuck.
none.
I can die to that.
Becomes a much nicer place to live in. And all we have to do is push harder against the next version of that. The fact that if you get a certain variant of the gene coding for the leptin receptor in your brain, no matter how self-disciplined you are, no matter how much you actually love yourself, and no matter what you do, you're going to be overweight because your brain doesn't get satiation signals. And when you look at sort of implicit biases in society these days, one of the only ones that has grown stronger in recent decades is implicit biases against people who are overweight, because we associate it with a lack of self-discipline and self-indulgence, and they secretly don't love themselves at all. And you get that gene variant, and you're screwed. You can't do anything about it. And it's going to be a much better world when we subtract free will out of that one. All that's going to happen is while a subset of us, and I bet it's the subset
I can
of
do
people
some
who are,
shit,
like,
alright.
have the, privilege and
34,
opportunity to
31,
be interested in
41.
subjects like this and thus listen to something like this. But for most people who are not worrying about the moral relevance of their egregiously large salary, for most people, every single time we have subtracted free will out of our views of why people do what they do, the world has become a more humane place. It's great news.
I can see that being the case when we remove agency from the weather,
Right.
we remove agency from certain kinds of performance at school or this kind of thing. But when we remove agency from the movement of the legs to get one out of bed in the morning, and we remove the agency from the decision to get up and go outside and get some sun on your face versus the decision to lay around in your bed all day. Now, I don't know what the research shows, if it's conclusive on what kinds of effects the disbelief in free will actually has on human behavior, but a lot of people seem to predict that they're going to become less likely to make that decision to get out of bed and go and get some sun on their face, just because they've become aware that if they did make that decision, it wouldn't really be them that's in the driver's seat. So I think it sounds great up to a point. Now, given the fact that we both believe that this is true, that there actually is no agency there, that there's no option for us to just sort of stop at the nice bit, to say, look at all these sort of great societal notions that we've made, and look at some more that we could make, such as dealing with obesity. But we have to keep going, and we have to sort of get into the sludge. And it seems much easier, much more difficult for me to paint this kind of thing in such a positive light.
It's incredibly hard. And all that said, I was 14 when I stopped believing in free will, and for more than half a century since, I've thought blame and punishment and reward and praise and none of that stuff makes any sense whatsoever, and I totally, utterly am at intellectual peace with that.
I wanna
And
die.
despite that, I can actually act on those beliefs.
I wanna
for
kill
about
those who
3
made this
minutes
fucking
once
part.
every other month or so.
That person, I mean.
Incredibly. Like, somebody cuts me off of traffic and I hate their guts and think they're a rotten, foul human who should go to hell, or at least or someone says to me, nice lecture you did just now, and unavoidably for a few minutes afterward I'm going to feel like I'm a better human than average because of that, and thus deserve to get in the front of the line for the next great vaccine that comes along. Yeah, it's incredibly hard, and you gotta over and over come back and say, how did this person become who they are, and what are the ways in which I can't understand that in the slightest? What are the ways in which I'm feeling entitled? Well, when you look at it closely, you got to do the hard work with it. Amid that, though, a gigantic problem which I cannot see easily solved is the one of motivation, of ambition, and
What?
drive
You
and
can
all
be
of that.
too late?
We can protect people
Alright.
from damaging individuals
I'll
without
try
invoking
this
free
one
will,
real
and all
quickly.
sorts of versions of quarantine models and look at what the Scandinavian countries do in their criminal justice system, or we could do it in like a quarantine model for keeping people from being dangerous. Your kid is sneezing a lot, you don't send them to kindergarten tomorrow because they say, please, if your child has a nose cold, keep them home so they don't get everyone else sick. You could constrain their behavior, but you don't take their toys away while they're at home as punishment for their evil soul or something. Yeah, that's a realm in which we can protect society from one type of danger without having any sort of ethical attribution or whatever. That one we can solve. But how do you solve the one that gets somebody to decide they really, really, really want to spend 14 years getting trained to be a cardiothoracic surgeon? Or they really, really want to go to this party and their dorm mates are doing it, but instead they're going to study where's the motivation to come from for that. And that one's a much harder one. That one's much less clear how to engineer society. So rather than protecting people from dangerous, damaging individuals, how to engineer society so that motivation is in some way separated from
This one is definitely the simplest one.
Over it. Yeah, I don't know. Anything I can come up with is like ridiculously utopian or whatever, which is you got to get people into some sort of mindset where somebody sits down at the piano, they're a concert pianist, and they play and all of that to get into a mindset where what they will feel is wonder and gratitude. That it turned out just by chance that they had hands that could do things on a keyboard that will cause people to have emotions they never knew they had.
What?
Wow. How lucky am I that it turned out to be that way? How lucky? Yeah, okay. How lucky am I that I turned out to be smart enough to be able to take out glioblastomas, or that I turned out to have the capacity for empathy to do something nice for this homeless person? Yeah, that's a hard sell, to turn all of that into just gratitude, that randomness made you into that sort of person. And thus, you're willing to work with your unearned gifts of intellect and thus study for 47 years to be able to solve this problem or that. That one's a tough one. I don't have an easy answer for that. And this is cheating, but
I forgot what to do completely.
Really, I don't see a way around that one easily.
I've always
I'm telling you, I'm
answered this
so dumb.
question in terms of thinking about what's actually changed. I mean, yesterday, it still was the case that yesterday when I believed in free will, the actual in fact reason why I got out of bed and went to get some food was because I was hungry and my brain sort of determined that my legs would move and go into the kitchen, and all of the deterministic factors were still there, still acting on me. The only thing that's changed is I now recognize that that's why it's happening. Now, in the same way that yesterday I was hungry, and then today I sit down with a biologist who explains to me in precise detail exactly why I feel hunger, how it works.
My brain is... I have Alzheimer.
I still go and get the food. I mean, sure,
or dementia or everything.
On a meta level now, reflect more on what I'm doing here, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm hungry. So in the same way, whatever was motivating me yesterday to get out of bed is still motivating me to get out of bed today. The only difference is I recognize that I didn't control that motivation. I don't know where it came from. I'm sure I can sit there and I can meditate and I can think, okay, well, noticing that motivation coming over me to get up. Or maybe noticing that there is no motivation. Maybe that day I feel depressed and I want to stay in bed all day. But it seems weird for me to say that the reason I'm going to stay in bed all day is because I recognize that whichever decision I make, whether to stay in bed or get up, is outside of my control. Because the very fact that it's outside of your control should mean that one of them is going to happen nonetheless. And so I guess what I ask, I mean, people often say to me, well, you don't believe in free will, but you don't act like you don't believe in free will. You act like you believe in free will all the time. And you just alluded to that there, and in your book you say, I find it very difficult to live as if this is actually true, but what does it mean to live as if it's true? It might change the way that you morally assess people, but even then, does it really? I mean, you used the word rotten a moment ago. You said if someone cuts you off in traffic, you're tempted to say, well, I was a rotten person. But what does the word rotten mean? It just means that it's sort of gone bad. I mean, an apple can go rotten, but that doesn't mean you're making a moral assessment of it. It just means that you're looking at its behaviours and you're saying that in relation to what I want it to do for me, it's gone rotten. And so, what really has to change just by adopting belief in determinism and living as if that were true?
Well, what we have to go for is, amid this incredibly hard work, to think that way and to respond that way and to feel that way, we have to save that effort for where it really counts. Almost certainly, if it was 400 years ago, you and I,
What?
Articulate and
I hate this fucking
educated
part
or
because I cannot
whatever,
fucking
and
see
if we
where
were
to go.
400 years
Fuck
ago,
this part,
it
bro.
would seem just
Fuck it.
intuitively obvious that there are such things as witches, and they can
God
cause
damn
lightning
it.
storms, and you need
How
to
much
protect
did I
society
get?
from them.
26, that
And
sucks.
there is a moral justice in punishing them. And 400 years later, it is intuitively obvious to you and me that that's gibberish, that makes no sense at all. We're people of our place and time now, and that some of the things that are intuitively obvious to right now to frame in a effortful, free will kind of way, people are not going to believe at some point in the future. Okay, so let's try to think about people 400 years from now. Let's think about how each of us has
Sorry.
changed. When I was a kid,
Just so
if the kid sitting
disappointed.
next to me in school wasn't learning how to
Me.
read, I would have agreed with the teacher and everybody else. And hey, some kids just smart and they just don't work hard and all of that. And like here we are, some decades later, in the nature of knowledge in our world, that we now know there's this thing called dyslexia. Like, oh, we've been somewhere in the last 20 years or so in the
I
United
felt it
States,
coming.
the majority of people went from being opposed to gay marriage to supporting gay marriage. That's changed during that period. Sometime during this period, people figured out that autism is not caused by mothers who are incapable of love. Autism is when there's something screwy and you get little islands of unconnected function in the cortex during fetal life. But
Oh.
our own times. And what we see is the things that are so intuitively, obviously free of free will now, it's so intuitively obvious we don't even see it anymore. Like, yeah, your kid doesn't get a nose cold because they have a rotten soul, or because you have a rotten soul and their illness is God's punishment to you for that. Yeah, it's so obvious we can't even see anymore. We did it. We did that one. We subtracted that one out. And what it means is whichever one seems most difficult right now when we're being pulled in that direction, it's not intuitively obvious yet that people who are kind are not intrinsically more deserving humans than people who are not, because neither had anything to do with it. Okay, that one's going to take some work. That one, we're at that challenge at this point. All save the effort for the important ones.
I think that intuition of free will, actually, as well, and this might help
I'm
people
not sure,
too.
maybe this is the
one
hardest
of the
one, but I'm
problems
not sure.
of free will,
Not
and
sure,
one of the
not
ways
sure,
to
not
really
sure.
get into discussing it is to simply ask a person, well, what do you mean by free will? This thing that you sort of intuitively have, describe it to me. Because what we're talking about here is, somebody who says, I feel nihilistic because I've realized that all of my actions are determined. And I say, okay, well, what's the alternative to that? So suppose that this action that you commit is not determined by anything at all. That means it's random. You wouldn't be in control of that either. And if I
Exactly,
convinced you that
Alex.
you were just random events occurring all of the time, and that's what you were, that's all you are as a person, wouldn't that instill a similar nihilistic crisis? Okay, then maybe free will is kind of being sort of partly determined, partly not. Like if you try to actually
Laughable.
pin down the thing that you claim to believe in, it actually becomes very difficult to do. And I would say, I mean, this would be my argument and probably yours too, that whatever you do land on as an idea of what free will could be, it usually ends up being either self-contradictory, it doesn't make sense, impossible, or it's describing something that's not really free will, like I think we would say the compatibilists do, for example. And
Oh
so
my god.
I don't even know what this intuition really looks like. What is it that you want if this is troubling you? You know?
Yeah. Well, we have this tremendous source of malaise in that, like every other organism,
I forgot.
we're a biological machine, but unlike any other organism out there, we're the only one.
Oh
who
my
can
god,
measure
I don't have
machines
big brains
and be interested in its parameters and boundaries.
to play fucking
and
memory
keep it
demons
involved
flawlessly.
enough to try to understand where some of the levers and buttons are in the machine that we are, and machinists, can leave a huge emotional gap there when it comes to trying to understand, like, why we like sunsets, or why where love came from, or why it feels good to make the planet a better place, and the notion that we're just observing the machine in action is really challenging. In some ways, that's
I knew that was gonna happen. I felt that that was a possibility, even though I didn't press this one late. I pressed that one so fucking early that you had to buffer this to survive. Fucking hell.
Yeah, it's not just a problem with free will; it's a problem with being human.
Yeah.
And challenging positions are just what we like to do here on the Within Reason podcast. So, Robert Sapolsky, thanks for coming on, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us.
Well, thanks for having me on. Total fun, and glad to see we think in such similar ways.
If you enjoyed that conversation, you can watch more episodes of the Within Reason podcast by clicking just here. But remember, the show is also on streaming platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
No! Are you for real? You cannot be.
Sometimes and rarely, I'm on.
I'm sorry. Oh, actually, I'd actually like to. Oh, actually, this one is True Sympathies created by Self-PD. Yes, that's true. Yeah, let's watch this.
And not long ago on that app, I came across the so-called existential crisis iceberg.
I wonder how many of those I already know, just from my own experience and introspection and so on. Should I... Alright, let's not.
Now, as far as I can tell, this was originally posted on Reddit by a user called Cosvic into r/iceberg charts. I don't know if they made it, they were just reposting it, but the version on TikTok has over 5 million views and 500,000 likes. So it's obviously captured some people's imagination, and I thought we could take a look. We start at the top of the iceberg with everyone has their own complex life. This doesn't seem like an entirely radical realization, but it's a common enough revelation that it has a name. They call it Sonda, which is defined by one website as the profound feeling of realizing that everyone, including strangers passing in the street, has a life as complex as one's own, which they are constantly living despite one's personal lack of awareness of it. Like I say, this isn't super revolutionary on the surface. Everybody knows that you're not the only character in this play, but we do almost always feel like the main character, and we kind of forget that to everybody else, even to our closest friends, we're just accessories to their life. We're side characters to their play. It's quite profound when you really sit with it for a while and realize that this world is just brimming with conscious experience, most of which you'll never even know about, let alone get to engage with, much less experience. Next, worry about future. Again, very straightforward. You start to realize when
dumb!
you grow out of your childhood, you realize that you can't
Shit.
spend all day long just thinking about your next meal or who you're going to play with at lunchtime. No, you've got to think about things like taxes and owning a house and all of that kind of fun stuff. It's clear to see how this can lead to an existential crisis, especially when this goes wrong. Doesn't really require much more explanation, so I think we'll just move on. Okay, so now we're on the next level, on the tip of the iceberg. Simulation theory. You'll almost certainly have heard of this. It's the idea that we could all just be living in a simulation. This is something of a modern take on René Descartes' evil demon hypothesis. And Descartes' way of entertaining this idea is to imagine that there's an evil demon who's constantly deceiving us into thinking that the world around us exists in the way that it does, but in fact it doesn't, and we're all just being deceived all the time. A modern take on this is the idea that we're living in a simulation. You think that you're in a real world with real people and real objects, but actually you're in a computer simulation and your brain is just being prodded electronically to produce fake experiences. And this is broadly known as radical skepticism. If it can be questioned, then we should question it, and we begin to realize that we basically have no justification.
I thought I was dead!
Like the existence of the external world. And just thinking that this is possible is enough to send some people into an existential crisis, but enter Nick Bostrom, who popularized what's known as the simulation argument. Not just the idea that we could be living in a simulation, but the argument that we probably are. Bostrom does this by saying that humanity will inevitably be able to simulate human experience. If you look at technological progress, things like AI, it will be no time before we're able to comprehensively simulate entire worlds on our computers. But, says Bostrom, if these are true simulations of the world...
But I do not find this argument really plausible. Maybe I will change my mind. Let's hear it.
Then that world in the simulation will itself develop the ability to simulate worlds. And the world that they simulate, if a proper simulation, will itself be able to simulate worlds.
Well, actually... Well... It's not really flawed, is it?
And they'll be able to simulate worlds, and they'll be able to simulate worlds, and so on. So you have this sort
I
of
wonder
chain
how
of
true that
simulated
is.
worlds, all beginning with the first world, which is the only one that's actually real and not simulated. And Bostrom says, what's more likely? That we happen to be in the very first real world, or that we're in one of the potentially billions or trillions of simulated realities? Just on sheer probability, we should think we're almost certainly in a simulation. For what it's worth,
I'm still not sure where this probability comes from. But yeah. This argument will be more... It will sound more persuasive when we actually get to the point where we will be able to make complex simulations that that are similar to our world that we're experiencing, because all the simulations that we have now, they're not really impressive. No, they are, but not on the same scale as our world. If we get to a point where we will be able to simulate our whole universe, then yes. Can we get there? No.
I'm not super convinced by this, mostly because I'm suspicious that we will ever be able to simulate human consciousness.
Yes, here.
That's a big topic, and perhaps one for another video.
Simulate human consciousness. Well... No, that's possible. I definitely believe it's possible, but it will be very unethical.
But I have had Nick Bostrom on my podcast, and we did talk about AI consciousness.
Bro, I gotta watch that video.
I also have a whole video explaining the meaning of the evil demon and Descartes' famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am," all available in the description below. Next, why does anything exist? This is one of the most naive philosophical questions that anybody can ask. It's one of the first questions that anybody can ask, and one of the most profound. Why is there stuff? If you consider the possibility that there could have been nothing, it seems like there could have just never existed anything ever, and yet there's stuff. There are chairs, and there are trees, and there are minds, and there are colours. There are all kinds of weird things. I mean, there may even be things called morals, if you're a moral objectivist. There are all kinds of weird things that exist, either materially or immaterially. None of that had to be. And this can cause an existential crisis, I think, in two ways. Because when you start trying to answer this question, you might say, well, I guess it just exists for no reason and we'll never know, which is quite existentially troubling. But if you determine that there is some answer as to why anything exists, there's some reason that you've discovered, maybe it's because God created the world and designed it in this way, then you've introduced something like purpose, and purpose that's externally put upon you. And now you have this teleology in your life whether you like it or not. So when you really reflect on the fact that there could have been nothing, but there is
You
stuff,
suck
you're either
at
going to
it.
be left with this really uncomfortable agnosticism about why you're here in the first place, or possibly land on an answer which
Anyways,
might just revolutionize your entire life. Acknowledgement of death. Okay, this one's pretty straightforward. When you realize that you're going to die for the first time, it can be a little bit scary. Most people know they're going to die. Some people think they might be able to
I
escape
won't ever
it.
die.
We'll see how that goes for them. But most people think that they are mortal. Fine, but when was the last time you really acknowledged it? I don't mean just accepted that it's true. I mean sat down for 20 minutes and thought about nothing other than your own mortality and really tried to comprehend what it means.
Actually, that's a good advice. Everyone should do that. Of course, the experience will never stop. But your experience will stop at some point. Well, and then something like reincarnation will happen. Not of your soul, of course, obviously. But just the experience will never stop. It cannot stop.
One day you will not exist. I did this once when I was a teenager, and I don't think I've ever done it since, partly because it scared the absolute living shit out of me. These days I'm a little more agnostic about the nature of mind and the existence of God and the afterlife, and so I suppose that provides me with some comfort, but I must say that when it comes to existential crises, it doesn't get much more straightforward than realizing that your time is limited on this planet. Having said that, some people do think that the shortness of life is what gives it its meaning. They say that if life were infinitely long, then every day would be meaningless. It's like having infinite money in your bank account.
Yeah,
It's $1
unfortunately
to
we
you.
do
It's
have
meaningless.
infinite life,
It has no value, essentially.
infinite
Whereas if you've
capacity
only
to
got $100 in your bank
experience
account, then
things.
$1 can be quite a lot of money to you. So the acknowledgement of death may lead to an existential crisis, but it may also lead to a recognition of the very thing that gives life meaning in the first place. Okay, we're moving down a level. Sympathy is created by self-pity.
That's true.
I'll admit that I don't actually know exactly what this is getting at. I suspect it's something like the idea that our care for other people is actually only a derivative of our care for ourselves. Is it just some evolutionary wiring? And if it is evolutionary wiring, then why would it evolve? Surely evolution favors what will help me to survive, so why would I evolve a capacity for caring about other people? Oh, well, it must be that in some way caring about other people is good for me. That might be a true evolutionary account of how morality evolves, but it's not a very wholesome one, especially when you consider your love and care for your friends and realize that that might just be some kind of evolutionary trick. But like I say, I don't know if that's what this is actually getting at. It's just my best guess. Last Thursdayism. What on earth is that? Well, put simply, it is the supposition that the entire universe and everything in it was created last Thursday. That's it. Why would anyone believe this? Well, as far as I can tell, nobody actually does. It's more like a thought experiment, which is why maybe it doesn't belong on the existentialist iceberg.
Oh
the
my
idea is
God.
that you can't disprove that the universe was created last Thursday. It might have been, and all of your memories might just be an illusion that were created at the same time. So, okay, nobody really believes this, but why does the thought experiment exist? It generally comes up in two contexts. The first is this radical skepticism again, the idea that we can't justify some of even our most basic fundamental philosophical beliefs. The second context is specifically young Earth creationism. This is a branch of Christianity that
you
believes
can
the
die like
universe
that,
is
so
about
isn't it?
6,000 years old. Now, one of the great mysteries for the young Earth creationist is the existence of really old stuff. Like, really old stuff. Millions of years old type
Shit.
stuff. Things like mountains or fossils. These are much older than 6,000 years old, so how does the young Earth creationist account for them? Well, enter the so-called omphalos hypothesis, the idea that God created the world 6,000 years ago, but with the appearance of old age. Why would he do this? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but some suggestions include the functionality of the world. It needs things like mountains, and so God created them looking really old. But also, it could be a religious test. God knew that one day humanity would evolve secular science, and it would start telling us evil things like the Earth is older than 6,000 years old. So God put these things here
like
to
this
test
theory.
us, to make sure that we'll stay faithful even in the face of opposite evidence. Whatever the reason for people believing in this apparent age hypothesis, Last Thursdayism is kind of a parody of this to show how ridiculous it sounds and how ridiculous it is. Therefore, I think it could be existential crisis inducing in the context of radical skepticism, but no more than something like the simulation theory, so I don't really know why it's this low down. If you want a healthy brain, you need a healthy diet. And that is where today's sponsor, AG1, can help. AG1 is a daily health drink, a blend of over 70 vitamins, minerals, and other ingredients, including gut-friendly bacteria, antioxidants, high-quality mushrooms, and more. As I've been trying to improve my physical health, AG1 has been a crucial help. Just one scoop once a day contains the nutrients you need to support your energy and gut health, as well as your focus and balance. For the work that I do,
What? This is free!
Phosphorus,
No!
AG1 is a great morning habit to keep you
No.
active during the day. These minerals help to unlock the energy from the food,
No.
and as the science gets better,
This is
so
free.
does AG1. It's
This
already
was
been
free.
through 53 different
This was so
iterations,
free.
all in the service of producing the best
This was
supplement
so
possible. So
free.
if you want to give it a shot
So,
and incorporate
so
all of this into
free.
your morning routine, try AG1. Subscribe now and get a free bottle of vitamin D, as well as 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription. Go to drinkag1.com/withinreason to get started today. You are alone in your brain.
Fuck.
If you're a materialist, where are you? Like, where do you exist? You're probably
In my
kind of
fucking
the same
brain.
thing as your brain. You are your brain, in effect. But where's your brain? Well, it's
In
kind
my
of locked
fucking
away
skull.
inside of your skull, just sitting there in
Fuck.
the dark. I mean, we have sense data, we have our
Although I'm
eyes
not
to
sure I
see and
have
our ears
any
to hear, but
in
that's
my
just going
skull,
through
judging
nerves
from
and
my
being
deaths.
translated by our brain. It's essentially an illusion. I mean, your eyes actually see things upside down.
Fuck!
Your brain flips it over again, and you don't directly engage with sound. A vibration hits your eardrum and sends a signal down a nerve,
Fuck!
which gets translated by your brain into an experience. But when
Fuck!
you think about it, you're actually quite disconnected from it all. You're sort of like a person locked in a control room. You've got a big monitor and there are cameras outside so you can see the world, and there are speakers and microphones so you can hear everything that's going on too, but you're locked in that room and there's no way for you to
We're
get out.
also
And
locked
if
like
one
half
day
a
the
second
monitor
in
turned
the
off and
past.
the microphone stopped working,
Funny fact.
you would just be sat there alone in the dark. And I suppose the scary thing is you are in that situation right now. It's just that the monitor is switched on and the microphones are still working, at least for now. We are not alone. It would be pretty scary if there were aliens out there, not least because they might attack us for literally any reason, but also because it should revolutionize our view of life. Firstly, for the religious, the idea that humans are special and that
What are you doing?
but also all kinds of philosophy.
This
about
is the
humanity
dumbest
and
duel
the need for
ever.
a conscious agent as opposed to other animals would be radically altered
Fuck.
by alien life. But for someone like me, I don't know if
Fuck.
it's existential, I might put it a bit higher on the list. Afterlife skepticism. If you believe in God and you believe in the afterlife, then you are pretty consoled throughout most of your life that although your friends are dying, you're going to see them again. And although you're going to die one day,
What?
you don't need to worry because you're going to be somewhere better and you're going to be with all your friends again. But then you start questioning it. Does it really exist, or is it just a fantasy we've come up with for the purposes of controlling ourselves? That can definitely give you some existential dread, especially if it's the first time you've encountered the idea. However, many people get along just fine not knowing. I suppose if you knew that there were no
I forgot.
afterlife and your skepticism went all the way in that
What?
regard, then this would be pretty existential, but we've already done the acknowledgement of death thing, so I don't know why this would be lower down on the iceberg. Okay, we submerge to the next level and we start with nihilism. Nihilism is sort of the crown jewel of existentialism. In many ways, it's the result of an existential crisis
I
rather than the cause of
forgot.
one. When you start questioning these things, is there an afterlife? Maybe not. Oh, I'm definitely going to die one day. Oh, I don't know why I'm here. The result of this is to think nothing matters. And even if something does matter, I have absolutely no way to
don't.
work out what it is. And I've tried, but I can't get there. So I'm just going to give up all hope in that project. So nihilism is broadly the view that nothing matters, that there are no objective values. There are sort of different kinds of nihilism. You can be an epistemological nihilist or just a moral nihilist. Or everything. But I think this all-encompassing, nothing matters in any context is what people tend to think of when they think of a nihilist. I understand why it's here, but like I say, the other things on this list cause existential crises.
Anyways.
This seems to me more the result of one. We
This
are
level
alone. A
requires
controversial choice,
you
putting
to
it
use
so
your
low,
fucking brains.
We are not alone. There's that famous
Crap.
quote by Arthur C. Clarke. Two possibilities
Crap,
exist. Either
crap,
we are alone
crap,
in the universe,
crap.
or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. The author of this chart has decided that they're not equally terrifying, and us being alone is more scary than us not being alone. I don't know about this. Let me know what you think in the comments. If we are alone in the universe, then we're forced to contend with this image of us sort of being on this rock floating around in cold space, and it does all feel a bit scary and isolated. But I will also say that if in this entire incredible universe there's only one place where life evolved, I think that counts as some evidence towards theism. I mean, if life just evolves
What?
spontaneously, we rightfully ask the question, as Fermi famously did, where is everyone? If life can just spontaneously evolve on planets, then given the abundance of life-permitting planets in the universe, where are they? However, if the entire universe was created with the express intention of permitting human life on planet Earth, that mystery sort of disappears. It's of course replaced with the mystery of why the universe would need to be so big in the first place, but I've discussed this in depth with my friend Joe Foley from Unsolicited Advice. And that was
What?
7 questions atheists cannot answer. But I don't know, what do you think? What would be more scary? Us being alone or us not being alone? Okay, next. Being born before immortality. I think this is getting at the idea that as science advances, many people believe we might one day be able to overcome death itself. And this day being, of course, in the future, and maybe the near future, we might well be living in the last mortal age. So it kind of feels a little bit unfair that maybe our grandchildren will get to live forever, but we, just because we happen to be born before the scientific development that made it possible, will not get to live forever. There are a few problems with this, if you ask me. One is that I'm not sure if science will one day overcome death. But when it comes to immortality, materially speaking, I just don't think this is possible. Even if we develop the technology,
No!
one day the sun is going to eat the earth, and maybe if we've escaped the earth by then, that planet will one day die, and wherever we've spread to, that planet will one day die too, and eventually the universe is going to come to some kind of end, whether it be a big freeze, or a heat death, or whatever. It's not the kind of environment in which I think conscious experience and materially existing human beings even can obtain. But also, even if that were possible, would you want to live immortally in this heat death or big freeze universe? It doesn't sound super attractive to me, and so the idea that I'm born before immortality is actually pretty consoling. Deeper we plunge. Dual consciousness theory. Okay, this is a fun one. Dual consciousness theory is, broadly speaking, the idea that 2 consciousnesses can exist in one brain. How can this happen? Well, one way is as the result of a surgery called a corpus callosotomy. Your brain, as you probably know, is split into 2 hemispheres.
So
and these hemispheres are connected by a group of fibers called the corpus callosum.
That is not. It gives you reason to live.
And this allows, as well as impedes, communication between your 2 hemispheres. A corpus callosotomy is the severing or partial severing of the corpus callosum, and this is most commonly done as a treatment for extreme cases of epilepsy. When the corpus callosum is severed, communication between the 2 hemispheres is disrupted. Now, they can still communicate to a limited degree through other means, but we do sometimes begin to see some weird things happening. In 1908, it was reported that there was a woman whose left hand would sometimes attack her. Her left hand would grab her throat and try to strangle her and require her to use her right hand and the rest of her body to fight it off. Since then, there have been many documented cases of this so-called alien hand syndrome, where somebody's limb can do something completely contrary to their will and seem to have a mind of its own. This isn't always dangerous, but it can result in people, for instance, pouring out a cup of coffee on the floor that they've just brewed. Or in some cases, one hand might be trying to put on clothes to start the day, whereas the other hand then goes to take them off because it wants to stay in bed or something. This is an extremely interesting, but of course also horrifying condition for a person to live with, and it's best documented in cases where somebody has undergone a corpus callosotomy. Now, you may know that the right hemisphere of your brain broadly controls your left arm, and the left hemisphere of your brain broadly controls your right arm. And so if the hemispheres aren't communicating with each other, it might make sense that your arms would start wanting to do different things. And this is seen by some as supportive evidence that, at least in cases of split brain patients, like those who've undergone a corpus callosotomy, that there are 2 consciousnesses sort of in battle with each other in this one human brain. I recorded a podcast earlier this year with Ian McGilchrist, author of The Master and His Emissary, which is about...
I don't die there only because of my hand being weak or not agile enough. It's actually pretty agile, but my brain just cannot hold. It cannot read so quickly. I notice how often I make mistakes because of just not being able to read when to click. I should play those levels with speed hack first.
About the 2 hemispheres of the brain and how they kind of do different things and have different ways of approaching the world. So even if it might be most obvious in split brain patients, it might still be the case that there are 2 consciousnesses within you. You just don't notice it as much because your corpus callosum is allowing them to communicate with each other and work in harmony. And this got me thinking about those split brain patients. If you have alien hand syndrome and your left hand is trying to do something and you have no idea what it's doing and can't control it, if it's just the result of 2 consciousnesses, then you're only aware of the one that doesn't want the hand to be moving. So where is the consciousness that does want to move the hand? Is it sort of trapped somewhere without any ability to speak or communicate? The split brain patients have this consciousness within them that's controlling that alien hand, but it can't get out through the mouth or any other means of communication? Is that alien hand trying to tell us something? I don't want to think about it. Observation creates the universe. Okay, it's generally thought that the material world around us exists whether we're here or because of our observation or because of our minds sort of creating it. I suppose the person to reference here is George Berkeley and his philosophy of idealism. This is the view that there are
Not
no
hard.
no material world. The only thing that exists are ideas in people's minds.
Fuck!
I don't have the time or the expertise to go into George Berkeley's philosophy in depth here. The basic idea is that the universe is kind of created by the mind, or is an idea or set of ideas within the mind. And the idea that the universe is created by observation suffers from a similar objection to George Berkeley's worldview. And that objection is this: if the universe only exists because it's being observed, suppose I light a candle and then I leave the room. An hour later I come back into the room and the candle has melted. But if the universe only exists insofar as it's being observed...
Fuck this level with that fucking Electroman Adventure song that makes all orbs so fucking small.
It might have started to exist again, but it should be in the same state that I left.
Fuck.
It has to have existed in the meantime in order to have melted. But how does it exist if the universe is created by observation? In the context of George Berkeley, he had a very straightforward answer to this.
Fuck.
Well, the candle is still being observed when you leave the room, just not by you. It's being observed by someone else. Can you guess who? So George Berkeley's idealism is, at least in his view, a novel proof for the existence of God. God is the ultimate observer who creates the universe. Now, I think that if you believe the universe is created by observation, then you do suffer from this objection a little bit, and maybe are led into the hands of this argument for God's existence. So in the context of the existential crisis iceberg, well, this might be something that doesn't cause an existential crisis. It might actually solve one, because it leads you right into the hands of an argument for the existence of God. Mystery of consciousness. Well, consciousness is the most mysterious and yet familiar thing in the world.
I hate this level more than everything.
Anything except through it.
Oh my god.
So I won't go into detail here, but that's kind of the existential part. The idea that this fundamental thing about our experience, the very window through which we perceive the world or are able to think at all, is something so foreign to us that we don't even understand the mechanism by which it works. Not only that, but we don't even seem close to coming up with a solution to the mystery of consciousness. So the thing that's most fundamental to our experience as sentient human beings is a complete and utter and impenetrable mystery to us.
I died to that even without.
Okay, next level, deeper we plunge. Past and future exist simultaneously. The most common view of time is the so-called A theory of time. A theory states that the present is all that exists. Time genuinely flows, the past is no more, and the future is yet to be. But there's also the B theory of time. This suggests that past, future, and present all exist on something like a time block.
Too fast.
And
Let's
that we're
try
sort of
online,
perceiving
basically.
one part of
But
the
on
time
another
block,
level.
and that's what we call the present. On this view, things like objects or people don't have 3 dimensions, they have 4 dimensions. They actually have
So
4
I have
dimensions
29.
right now. They have a dimension left
Let's
to
write
right,
them down.
forward to back, up to down, but also past to future. So the past version of you from 5 minutes ago is as much a part of you now as the left-hand side of your body is. Likewise, future you is a part of you. It's a bit like if I could only see my left hand and my right hand was behind my back. I can't see it, but it's still very much there. This will have all kinds of implications. For example, free will. If your future self kind of already exists, can you really have any choice in what it does? But also it gives us reason to doubt our intuitions, because intuitively we do travel through time. Intuitively the past doesn't exist anymore. But if the B theory of time is correct, we have to abandon that intuition, which tells us that the way that we initially view the world is often philosophically completely and utterly wrong. Now I find this interesting, but not particularly existential, at least not compared to the other stuff we've been talking about, so I'm a bit surprised to find it this low down, but maybe I've just misunderstood what the author is getting at. And if the author is watching this video, then, well, let me know. Okay, everybody's heard of determinism, right? Well, get ready for superdeterminism. What is superdeterminism? Well,
Yeah, I know
normal
about
store-bought
that.
determinism is the
Nothing
view
fucking
that
changes.
everything happens in accordance with a determined chain of events. If you could know the direction and speed of every atom in the universe, then in principle you could predict everything that's going to happen in the future with 100% accuracy. It's a little bit like how when you flip a coin, it feels random, but if you actually knew all of the physical conditions of the coin, you could predict with 100% accuracy whether it would be heads or tails. Determinism says that the whole universe works in this way. Things seem to be subject to chance.
What?
They're not at all. Now you may have noticed that any time you ever bring up this subject ever to anybody, the very first thing they say is, what about quantum physics? everybody's heard that quantum physics involves some element of randomness, that electrons don't actually exist in one place or another, but there's some kind of wave of probability, and that there's actually a lot of chance going on at the most micro level of our universe. Well, sure, yeah, maybe. No one knows for certain what's going on down there. But there is this view called superdeterminism, which, as far as I understand, is sort of like determinism but applied to quantum physics. I'm not a physicist, so I'm kind of the wrong person to ask, but as far as I understand, superdeterminism allows us to do things like retain the actual reality of particles rather than having these quantum probability clouds. If you want to learn more, there are some great YouTube videos on the subject, including by people like Sabine Hossenfelder or Arvin Ash. Those two, I think, actually have differing views on the matter, so maybe worth checking both of them out. Although I'm not sure, because, again, I don't fully understand all of this stuff. But basically, I think that what's going on with superdeterminism is the removal of randomness, even at the quantum level. Why would this cause an existential crisis? Maybe because of free will. If somebody believes in free will, the idea that the universe is determined can be a big problem for their worldview. I mean, if the way everything is going to go is completely determined from the Big Bang, then you can't really be said to be in control of the future of your own actions. So a lot of people take refuge in the idea that there is some randomness in the universe, it's not all determined.
Actually,
I think this is totally misguided. I'm just going to be blunt here, because randomness is something which, by definition, you're not in control of either. If something happens truly randomly, it's part of the definition of random that you didn't have some determinate cause in making it occur. Now, in my experience, when I've argued that free will doesn't exist, people often do bring up quantum randomness as a kind of retort. So I understand why superdeterminism would cause an existential crisis for these people, but to be honest, the existential crisis should have been there anyway, because of course, even if there is randomness in the universe, you're not in control of it. Human life is a momentarily universal anomaly. I think that's supposed to say a momentary universal anomaly. That is to say that in the course of the universe, something like human life or conscious existence is an anomaly. It's a sort of accidental flash that will come and it will go, and the universe will go on mindlessly for the rest of eternity. It's a bit like that clip from True Detective where Matthew McConaughey's character, Russ, I think his name is, I haven't seen the show, is in a car talking about how human consciousness is some kind of cosmic accident and he's being all nihilistic about it. I think that's kind of the thought that's supposed to be captured here. And obviously, if we are just some kind of cosmic accident, that's not the most existentially fulfilling revelation in the world, so I can understand why it would be on this list. But again, maybe I've misunderstood what it's getting at. Going deeper now, we are underneath the iceberg. The brain creates the flow of time. To be honest, I find this difficult to separate from the previous idea of the past and future existing simultaneously, because if the past and future exist simultaneously, then where does time come from? It's got to be an illusion of the mind, so I think it's kind of similar to that. Boltzmann brain. Oh boy. One way to think about a Boltzmann brain is to consider that over an infinite amount of time, extremely unlikely things are guaranteed to happen. If the universe existed for an infinite amount of time, and there were just atoms floating around everywhere, then given that it's infinite, these atoms would form spontaneous structures and then dissolve, and every structure that you could possibly think of that can be made of atoms would at some point exist. The second law of thermodynamics says that entropy will always increase over time, and entropy is the amount of order or lack of order in a system. In practice, this means that if I spray an aerosol can over on this side of the room, particles will be released, and they'll be on this side of the room. Given enough time, they'll spread across the room, and eventually they'll be spread evenly across the room. Why does this happen? Because atoms are randomly vibrating in different directions, and given enough time, they just happen probabilistically to spread out evenly. But we are just talking about probability here. It's not impossible, in principle, for all of those particles that came from that aerosol can that are spread across the room to just spontaneously come together and jump into a water bottle sat on a table over there. It's just so unimaginably unlikely that we can basically treat it as a law that that's never going to happen. But suppose you had an infinitely existing universe. When you have an infinite amount of time, unlikely events aren't just probably going to happen, they're definitely going to happen. It's a bit like the monkeys on the typewriters. Given enough time, they'll produce the works of Shakespeare. It's not clear that would actually happen in that example, but you get the point. Randomness over an infinite amount of time is such that even the most extremely unlikely events will happen. In fact, they'll happen over and over and over again, because we're talking about an infinite amount of time here. So the realization that Boltzmann, of Boltzmann brain fame, had was that in this infinite universe where everything that could be made of atoms is made, sometimes brains will spontaneously form. Brains are just made of atoms after all, and everything does get made. And what's more, brains can spontaneously exist with a bunch of false memories. A little bit like the
That's true.
simulation or last Thursdayism, the idea that brains can have fake memories of the past. Well, sure, I mean, memories are just brain activity, and that's just made of atoms. So there will be brains that spontaneously exist with a bunch of false perceptions and false memories as a matter of certainty in an infinite universe of atoms bumping around with each other. And given the fact that these spontaneously existing brains with fake memories are going to happen much more commonly than actual brains evolved from a traditional way, requiring the evolution of galaxies and stars,
My
and
brain is
planets,
so
and
dumb.
simple life, and the evolution into human life, and the evolution of consciousness, and all of this kind of stuff, right? If you want to create a real brain with real memories, all of that needs to happen. And that's a much lower state of entropy than just the brain spontaneously coming into existence. Now, of course, that less likely state of affairs will still happen. Remember, everything happens in an infinite amount of time, but it will just happen much less. So in this infinite universe of atoms bumping into each other, there will be far more of these brains, which are known now as Boltzmann brains, than there would be real brains with real experiences. And just like with the simulation argument, we have to ask, what's more likely? That you're one of these real brains with real memories, or that you're one of these much more common Boltzmann brains? And if you are a Boltzmann brain, what does that mean? It means that you, right now, are just a spontaneous arrangement of atoms in an infinite universe that at any moment is about to disassemble and you will exist no more. So ultimately this is another kind of radical skepticism. It's a little bit more sort of sciencey, so it seems to have a bit more weight behind it, but you'll have noticed that this relies heavily on the idea that there is an infinite past of atoms bumping into each other according to the same laws of thermodynamics that exist in our universe, which appears to be a finite universe which started 13.8 billion years ago. Of course, maybe our universe is just one of many, maybe something came before the Big Bang, and maybe it stretches infinitely back into the past, but there's no reason to think that atoms would vibrate and move in the same way, so I think that the philosophical and scientific evidence...
I forgot everything! I cannot! I just can't fucking hold all of it in my fucking tiny little brain! Fuck this shit! This is 7-star gameplay, but I just cannot remember. I need 2 sleep buffs to not fail here. Oh my god!
Every possible outcome actually happens, and that the universe kind of splits into different realities, each of which plays...
Why is everything so fucking invisible? Why is it transparent?
With David Deutsch, a fervent believer.
I'm not sure it would have
multiverse. If you're
helped
interested,
me
a link is down below. But take
if
for
it
example,
wasn't.
Schrodinger's cat. A quantum event determines whether a cat will die or live, and until you open the box, the cat is both dead and alive at the same time. The many worlds interpretation says that there are simply 2 branching realities, one in which the cat lives and one in which the cat dies. But they both actually happen. They're just different branches of
I don't
continue
remember.
on independently of each other. So now we can consider a slightly dark thought experiment known as quantum suicide. Imagine the Schrodinger's cat setup, but instead of the cat,
What am I doing?
through the same quantum mechanism has a 50% chance of killing you and a 50% chance of letting you live. You press the button and you're still alive. Okay, lucky you. You press the button again. You're still alive. You press the button again and again and again and again and again. Is this thing on? You're still alive. Either the machine must be broken or you have beaten incredible odds. I mean, every single time you press that button, the likelihood of your survival decreases to vanishingly small proportions. So suppose you press the button 100 times, 1,000 times, 500,000 times, and you're still alive. What would that tell us? Well, some people suggest it would tell us that the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is true. If other interpretations are correct, and there's a probability of outcomes, and by pressing the button you realise one of them, it shouldn't take very long for you to die. Whereas if it's the case that every single possible outcome does happen in some reality, then consider this. Every time you press the button, 2 branches of reality are created. One in which you live, and one in which you die. Now, which one of those branches does your conscious experience go down? That is, from your perspective, which of those branches do you...
What did you do? This! You died to this!
It can't go down the one in which you die, because you're dead. There's no you for that conscious experience to continue in. Therefore, every time you press the button, your consciousness has to go down the branch of reality in which you survive. At least in this thought experiment, subjectively speaking, You can't die. I mean, there'll be many versions of you in different branches of reality which do die, but your consciousness is going to follow that branch where you stay alive. Thus, on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, quantum immortality. And actually the final entry on this iceberg, you cannot die from your perspective, I think is essentially getting at the same thing. One biographer of Everett states that, quote, Everett firmly believed that his many worlds theory guaranteed him immortality. His consciousness, he argued, is bound at each branching to follow whatever path does not lead to death. So what I was saying a moment ago about your consciousness always following the branch in which you stay alive, this biographer is suggesting that Everett believes this about life in general, that you will always escape your death, because there will always be a quantum reality in which you survive, and that's where your consciousness will go. Not just in this convoluted thought experiment, but just in life as a whole. Now, I don't know if Everett actually thought this is just one biographer's opinion, but it's an interesting thought. One interesting fact about quantum suicide is that it can only ever verify the many worlds interpretation. It can't falsify it. It can't prove it false, because in order to prove it false, the person doing the experiment would have to die. So if you keep on living, you can prove the theory might be true, but you can't prove with this experiment that it's false, because this would involve dying first. It also has to be you that does the experiment. You could get somebody else to press that button for you, but if you watch them die in front of you, all you know is you're in the branch of reality in which they died. You don't know where their consciousness has gone. The only person who can ever know the result of the experiment is the person doing the experiment. Another biographer of Everett, Wikipedia tells me, Peter Byrne, says that Everett also privately discussed quantum suicide, that is this weird thought experiment that we've just been talking about, but adds that, quote, it is unlikely, however, that Everett subscribes to this quantum immortality view, as the only sure
I cannot believe that happened twice!
Hardly a rational goal. I don't know about that, because it seems to me that the point is that, yeah, lots of copies of you will die, but the one that retains your conscious experience will always be the one that remains alive. Hey, it's not super convincing, but neither are many of the other attempts at immortality that humans have come up with in the past. Now, this is at the bottom of the existential crisis iceberg. For a lot of people, the idea of living forever would be great news, but of course it's also true that many people are terrified of the prospect of immortality. So if we've got no choice in the matter, and we're all quantumly immortal whether we like it or not, for some people that's good news, for some people that's bad news. And hey, to rehearse one overused, famous YouTubery motto, let me know what you think down in the comments. But that's the existentialist iceberg. I may have got some of them wrong, I may have got most of them wrong. If you think that I did, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Don't forget.
How long have I been playing for? Not that long, actually. I believe, I hope, I trust. What else do we have? Philosophy of sports. Who's that guy? Where's the podcast with him? Where can I find it? This? No. No. Anyways, there was something that I wanted to watch. I already fucking forgot. Oh wait, I remembered. I think I remembered. It was something. Oh yeah, AI. Where? Yeah, I wanted to watch this one. Oh.
Nick Bostrom, welcome to the show.
Oh, my pleasure.
Do you spend more time these days being optimistic or pessimistic about the future of artificial intelligence?
I think I'm in a superposition.
Yeah, so equal time on either, would you say? Because, I mean,
Well,
you're
or
the
a
sun.
lot of time on both at the same time. I feel the prospects are quite ambivalent, and it's just this big unknown that we're approaching. And I think, yeah, there's like realistic prospect of doom, realistic prospect
Fuck,
of
Rob
a
Top.
particularly good future, and also realistic prospects of outcomes where it might not be clear immediately, even if we could see all the details, how we would evaluate it. in some sense, maybe that's the most likely
I love this game.
possibility. That the future might be really good in some sense, although different from the current way that we are, in such a way that we'd lose some and gain some, and how you sum that all up might be non-obvious.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it seems like every person who interviews you likes to point out the interesting fact that, unlike a lot of authors, you've kind of represented both positions here. I mean, you've written extensively an entire book about the dangers of
What?
happen if you
No.
people would like to point out there's a certain sort of unusual fairness in your
I
approach.
forgive you.
Writing your most recent
It's
book, Deep
fine.
Utopia, which, as the name suggests, is
You
a
make
description of the
mistakes.
opposite. So
Way
I suppose that
less
could imply
often
that you remain sort of agnostic on the question.
than I do.
I mean, I'm imagining like a lot of people get very fearful about artificial intelligence and what it can do to our society, and not to mention the potential implications of the mistreatment of AI itself
What?
once it starts to resemble something that might be conscious. And when it comes to talking about conscious life in general,
Fuck.
a lot of the time in pop philosophy, people like to ask the question, would you push the big red button? Would you sort of eliminate all life on Earth to sort of stop all the suffering? And it's a difficult question for a lot of people to weigh up. And I wonder if there's an analogous question to be asked here about artificial intelligence. If you had the opportunity to sort of single-handedly prevent what we're currently calling artificial intelligence from sort of going any further and sort of quell its exponential rate, if you had to sort of instinctively, based on what you've researched and written about, make that decision, what do you think would be best for the world?
I don't think I would press that
Fuck.
button. For one, it seems
Where did
to
I get?
arrogate to oneself
Yeah.
too much power and influence. I don't feel qualified to make that momentous decision myself. But even if somehow you imagine a scenario where people said, "Oh, you got to make the decision. We've all decided you should make the decision." I still think this transition to the machine intelligence era ultimately is a portal through which humanity, human civilization needs to pass, and that all the realistic paths to really great futures go through this portal. And I think there would be risks associated with the transition, and we should try to minimize those.
Yeah.
And on the margin, there's an interesting debate about whether we
then
should move
let's
slightly
just
faster
try
or slightly
finish
slower,
polishing
or
the bed
exactly how
without
it should be governed, and
doing
what we
any
can do
bullshit.
to put things in the best possible order. But I wouldn't want to permanently
Let's
block
finish
it.
it and stop fucking playing this fucking
And
game.
I mean, what would you say? A lot of people, as I say, like to talk about the dangers of artificial intelligence. It's quite refreshing to read a book about the potential utopia that awaits us. But just as an overview to get into this conversation, what would you say is the biggest threat that artificial intelligence poses specifically, in your opinion? And then afterwards, I want to ask you the same thing about some of its greatest benefits.
My again.
It's hard to pick one. I'd say
Fucking wet.
there are
Everything's
three
fucking wet. Wet!
interconnected challenges that we need to solve to get a good outcome, I think. So first, there is the alignment problem. It's maybe the challenge that has received the most attention, and was the main focus of my earlier book, Superintelligence, which came out in 2014. And this is the technical problem of how to develop methods for steering AIs such that even as they become arbitrarily capable, eventually super intelligent, we can still make sure that they are sort of nice to us, that they actually are aligned with the creator's intentions. Back then, it was a very neglected problem, which is the reason for why I thought I needed to write this book. In the intervening 10 years, the situation has changed quite radically. All the frontier AI labs now have research groups working on trying to develop scalable methods for AI alignment, and many other groups as well. But that's one. Otherwise, you might get these, paperclip scenarios. It's kind of the cartoon version of it, but various outcomes where the future gets shaped by some random goal that the AI happens to end up with. Then there is what you might call the governance challenge, which is to make sure, suppose we could solve the alignment problem, how can we then make sure that at at least on balance and predominantly, we use this extremely powerful technology for beneficial purposes. So not to oppress one another or to wage war or invent new weapons of mass destruction, but sort of broadly to alleviate suffering and progress the situation for humankind and other biological creatures. And it kind of intersects with the alignment problem because there are sort of situations that could arise.
I got
different
scared of
companies or
something.
countries competing and racing, which might make the alignment problem harder. But then, in addition to these two challenges, I think there is a third,
What?
which some of my more recent writing has focused on, which is it's not enough if we prevent AIs from harming us, and if we also prevent AIs from being used by humans to harm other humans. We also need to make sure that
Why?
if we are building these increasingly sophisticated digital minds that might attain moral status, maybe they are conscious or maybe they have preferences or other attributes that are more relevant, that the future also is good for them. And ultimately, most beings in the future might be various kinds of digital minds. So it matters a great deal.
Oh, you gotta be fucking kidding me.
Oppressed slave class of AI minds, but that we have a future that's good for everybody. So I'm not really sure exactly. You asked like what I thought the biggest risk.
How?
Very serious challenges.
And in terms of the benefits that AI can bring, I mean, quite obviously we're beginning to see right in front of us,
Thank
things like
you for
ChatGPT
playing.
are just sort of becoming completely commonplace to the extent
Thank
that
you for using my right hand to make me
making university
survive.
departments
That didn't
start
really
to get a
help
bit nervous about people handing in essays
in the end
really
because
just immediately come out of nowhere and become
I was
sort
not ready for you to
penetrate
be
everything
so
that you're doing.
autonomous.
Are there sort of more like non-obvious benefits that are further down the line that a lot of people don't really realize are potentially coming our way because of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think people
I'm down.
over-index on what AI is now. So we think, what is AI? Well, it's these kind of large language models, and you could imagine some incremental improvements and better integration with different products. And then
You
the
can die like
imagination stops there. And I mean, that's interesting from a commercial point of view. You want to know, like, what are the applications of these large language systems or similar systems? But I think this is only like one of the stages of the line that eventually leads all the way to radical forms of superintelligence that makes all human
what did I do?
labor obsolete. That we will develop AGI, artificial general intelligence, that will be better than human brains in all areas. So then the applications are basically all areas where cognition can be useful, which is a pretty broad set of areas. And in particular, it includes science and technological innovation and entrepreneurship. And so once you have machine superintelligence, I expect a radical acceleration of the rate of further technological developments. I think it will be a kind of telescoping of the future. So if you think of all those physically possible technologies that maybe human civilization would invent, if we had like 20,000 years to work on it with human scientists, maybe we would have space colonies and perfect virtual reality.
I fucking forgot about wanting to exist in this life. Discontinuously.
I think all of that might become available within a year or a few years after we have superintelligence. So that really could solve a whole bunch of problems. I mean, the most obvious area I think is medicine, where there's like just this massive amount of suffering and misery and death that we are currently unable to prevent. But with super intelligent medics and super intelligent medical researchers, I think that could be fixed. And then other problems with poverty, like if you have the economy being run by these much more efficient entities.
Oh my god.
Economic growth. And from there on,
why is there no star position? Why so little? So many, so few?
Really, you name it.
I forgot.
Get solved necessarily, as far as we can see now, are coordination problems. So problems that arise not from, as it were, insufficient technological powers, but from the fact that we currently use a lot of our powers not for the common good, but to fight one another.
Alright.
So that's more a political problem, where it's unclear what the impact of superintelligence will be.
We'll get back to Nick Boston in just a moment, but first, do you trust the sources of your news? I don't, and a lot of that's got to do with the bias that inevitably seeps into reporting. Luckily, you can cut through media bias with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News.
Thank you.
Bostrom. Yeah, a great deal of the thesis of deep technology is dedicated to what happens in this future world if we grant that this thing will continue to evolve and eventually begin to solve a lot of our problems, solve the problems of medicine, solve our technological shortcomings. You describe what you refer to as a solved world. That is sort of when this comes to
my
something of
brain
completion, where
again.
we essentially have no tasks, no technological tasks that we're unable to fulfill, and more than that, that some like robot intelligence will be able to fulfill for us. And the immediate question that comes to mind is what becomes of humanity at that point. It seems to be a potential ironic ending to the story of humanity, that in trying to fulfill its purpose, its daily purpose of trying to alleviate suffering and the things that people find the most meaning in the world, in actually completing that task, they simultaneously devoid the world of meaning itself, because there's no longer any sort of task to fulfill in any meaningful sense. And you talk about this, don't necessarily have to stop in this solved world where there are no technological challenges. We can create tasks for ourselves. We can create things that are a bit like games. We can have
Fuck you.
technologically induced goals, I think is the phrase that you use. And I suppose my question to you is, do you think that this is a valuable future? Is this a future that you would want to be living in? One where there are essentially no tasks left to fulfill in a technological sense?
So a lot of the earlier conversations around this topic I felt stopped at a relatively superficial level of analysis. So maybe you think if there was more automation, what would be the impact on the labor market?
I cannot believe.
Maybe there would be slightly higher
In God.
unemployment
After such a
rate.
death.
No, you could have
Fuck!
a debate about would those be permanent or would people invent new jobs. I mean, it used to be where we're all farmers, right? A few hundred years ago, and now.
I can't. I'm not sure we'll be able to fucking finish this level today because it's so fucking annoying and I'm so fucking dumb. I had fucking 2 opportunities to finish it. Already. 2.
Human labor. They are really quite profound and go much deeper and raise much more profound questions of what ultimately makes human life valuable. So for a start, I think human economic labor would become obsolete, right? Because the
Fuck
AIs
you.
and the robots
Fuck you.
would be able to perform all these economic tasks
Fuck
much
you.
more efficiently than any human can. There is like a little asterisk on that, where there like maybe a carve out for some small set of jobs that we could imagine. We could get back to that, but as a first
Can I do
broad
this?
brushstroke picture here, we have no need to work for a living in this condition of a solved world. But that's, I mean, it's profound in one sense, but not that profound. There are a lot of humans who don't have to work for a living, right? Like children, retired people, people who have inherited a lot of wealth or won the lottery, you know, some monastic communities. Like there's like a lot of groups we could look at, and you know, it's not that different from. So I think that would require a big cultural adjustment, but you know, ultimately we could make that work. Now, there's I think a further step though, if you start to think through what it means for AI truly to succeed, is that it's not just our economic labor that becomes unnecessary, but a lot of our other efforts as well. So a lot of the things that people who don't have to work for a living, they are still very busy and maybe working hard on various projects, but a lot of those could also be automated. It looks like we are entering a post-instrumental condition where all instrumental effort becomes unnecessary, or at least that's how it might appear. So that might seem threatening to various pictures of what makes human life, what makes for a good human life. And that's what the book really tries to dig into.
No.
So here, one can sort of do maybe a divide and conquer strategy. So we can look at various plausible values that philosophers have held out for what makes us a sort of desirable human life. So the most basic and most obvious is like, does the person actually enjoy their life? So pleasure in sense, like
I
it's
must
in a
take a rest.
psychological state of positive.
Oh, my fucking back is sweaty.
So that clearly you
Oh,
can get
shit.
extreme amounts of in this condition of a solved world.
Oh,
And I think it's easy
oh,
to
I'm in pain.
dismiss that.
Oh, I'm
yeah,
in
like,
pain.
It's like some sort of drug addict.
Oh,
or
I'm in
whatever.
pain.
But it's actually maybe the most important thing, and we could
I'm in
sort of really
tons
hit the
of
jackpot on that,
psychological pain.
where every moment could just
Fuck!
be this immensely wonderful, blissful experience. Like it could be a big step up from what we currently have. But maybe more philosophically interesting are the values that seem potentially to be threatened by this progress that we are postulating. So we can take it in steps. So pleasure, yeah, we can check that box. Then, well, what about I call it experience texture, where maybe rather than just feeling simple pleasure, you could have pleasure associated with various kinds of perceptions and experiences, like the appreciation of beauty in various forms, whether it's like art or nature. And so you like take great pleasure, but it's not just a kind of dumb pleasure, but it's like pleasure connected to deep appreciation of beauty or goodness or understanding of deep truths. That already makes it like able to accommodate a richer variety of moral philosophies that have different ingredients that are required for a good life. So that too, there's no reason for why these utopians could not have much deeper understanding of science and better art, and more importantly, I think, more developed sensibilities for appreciating this beauty. So we can check that box as well. And then there's the question of activity. Well, they could be very active, even if they have no instrumental needs they need to cater to. They could just decide to engage in various activities for the purpose of engaging in those activities. So they could be busy doing various things, just like children are busy playing, or grown-ups do various things as well, like hobbies and sports and things they don't need to do, but why not, if that adds value to their life?
Fuck.
Where it gets a little trickier is if we're talking about purpose. Like, so there's like some sense in which we might have all these experiences, this enjoyment and these activities, but there's no real need for us to do them, in that we could sort of secure the same outcomes even if we didn't do them, by just asking the robots to do them instead. So that, you might think, removes one possible thing.
No!
So there we can at least get some substitute in what I called artificial purpose, which I think what you alluded to. We could set ourselves arbitrary goals. If you have a hard time motivating yourself, you could even use some sort of newer technology to really make yourself want those goals. And then once you have the goal,
yay!
If the goal is suitably selected,
How many?
so it could be part of
116.
the goal you adopt, that it needs to be achieved by your own effort, rather than by asking a robot
Yeah, I'm
to
sorry, I didn't
achieve
let
it. So
you.
we do that already. Like you could, if you adopt
Oh,
the
that was actually
goal
your
of
will.
playing
Oh,
golf,
that's
for
nice to
instance,
know.
right? Like there would be a shortcut. You could just pick up the ball with your hand and
Twice in a
the
row,
hole.
guys.
But I would not really count as playing golf and achieving your goal of winning a game of golf, because it's kind of constitutively part of the actual goal of playing golf that you need to do it, and you need to do it without cheating, otherwise you're just not doing it. And so we could adopt these kinds of goals that really part of the goal is that you need to do it by your own effort. That would give us artificial purpose.
This is really interesting because, of course, what you're saying makes sense. The big question here is purpose, and the first thing that comes to my mind is to think a lot of people are worried that if everything is automated, if you're just sort of sitting there, food appears, comfort is there, like maybe you can still go to the gym or something, but only if you want to. You don't have to physically exert yourself in any way. What is the meaning? What's the purpose in life? Now, my first observation is to say this is something people observe in life now. The sort of Albert Camusian realization that getting up and going to work and eating food and coming back and then doing the same thing the next day is evocative of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the mountain. The only thing that this does, in my view here, the only thing it changes, is it makes that condition more evident. It doesn't actually change the fact that ultimately you're just sort of existing and doing things. And like you can have that crisis feeling already. It's just harder to notice.
Break,
You sort of have
definitely
to
break,
reflect
definitely a little
on
small
your condition.
break.
You have to realize and step outside of yourself. I just think it's easier to do that when you're just sort of sitting around doing nothing all day. But this idea of I mean, clearly humans need purpose. They need like tasks to fulfill. I mean, purpose might be something like a reason to act, and a reason to act means some sort of way the world could be that it's not, and you wanting to make it that way. That's sort of what it means to have a reason to act, a reason to do something. There's sort of how things are now and a motivation to make things different, be it sort of putting the ball in the hole, be it, you know, building a house, whatever it might be. Creating a task just for the sake of fulfilling it, I suppose that's essentially what a game is, something like golf. We sort of dig out this hole, we move the golf ball really far away, and we do all of that just for the purpose of like putting the ball in the hole, and that's fun. But while playing golf might be a part of a purposeful life for somebody, is a life that just consists in golf like that meaningful? I mean, imagine, for example, that we go one step further. I mean, you talked about how in order for it to really feel meaningful, you'd need to actually do the task. You couldn't just have a robot put the ball in the hole, right? You've got to do it yourself. Well, not necessarily. I mean, what if we build a kind of psychological robot that can mess around with your neurons and implant the memory of having just played golf? You don't actually even need to play golf.
No, that's great.
All
Great
you
idea,
need
I
to
like
do
it.
is press a button,
10 out of
and
10.
this
Honestly.
robot or some kind of technology like jolts your brain in such a way as to implant the memory that you've just played
They
golf,
have
and you get
fun,
exactly the
Def.
same feeling as if you had just
Let's
played
play
golf.
it on 0.9.
I want to look at somebody like that and say, whilst I understand that experientially your life is the same as somebody who just went and played golf for real, the fact that it was like artificially produced just for the sake of it
And let's have
kind of makes me think that there's something
9 units.
wrong about it, or something that seems meaningful but is in fact not, you know. And this is an analogy for life itself. If all tasks become a bit like this, that we sort of artificially induce things, just sort of for
I
the
cannot
sake of having that feeling, not even really for the sake of doing it itself. Like, I don't know, that feels a bit to me
That does
like
not make it.
being this golf hobbyist whose
That does not
entire
make it
golf
much
history
easier.
consists in fake
You
memories
cannot
of playing golf.
see.
Yeah, I mean, so it depends on what you want. If all you want is the experience of appearing to have played golf, then there might well be these shortcuts where you could sort of implant or generate, I mean, some sort of hyper-realistic virtual reality experience. Although there is an asterisk on that too, where there might be certain experiences, like particularly ones involving effort, where in some sense you might actually have to make the effort to have the experience of making effort. But setting that aside, if however what you want is not just to have fake memories of playing golf, but you actually want to play golf, then that's what you gotta do if you want to achieve your goal. You could select the goal in such a way that the only way it can be achieved would be by you making real efforts. Now it could be an arbitrary goal, and so it's interesting to consider whether we might be able to also have natural purpose, like purposes that don't result from sort of an arbitrary decision to give yourself a goal just for the sake of being able to pursue it. And I think there might be some opportunities for that as well in Utopia, in this kind of solved world.
Yeah, I should strive for this.
It might be worth reflecting what is the baseline there, like how, if we take our current human lives, like just how purposeful are they and how meaningful. And I mean, yes, there is a certain amount of purpose, like if people have to work or else they don't get the paycheck, and if they don't get the paycheck, eventually they get kicked out from their flat, and then they're going to be cold, and there are like real consequences. And if people don't put in these efforts, then they will suffer these real consequences. So in that sense, there is real purpose.
I'm so not used to this kind of double click.
And I don't think this Camus' Sisyphus
when you
thought
hold here
experiment
for a long time.
nullifies that, just because ultimately maybe we're all dead and it all comes to naught at the end. It doesn't mean that there aren't real consequences in the
Fuck.
interim.
No,
You know,
no, no, no,
consequences
no, no.
don't have to be everlasting for them to be real. You know, if you're like a doctor somewhere and you go to some place where they don't have healthcare otherwise, and you know, some child is suffering some painful condition, and then you give them some anesthetic and fix it up. You know, maybe it means that now there's less suffering. That the child has like, you know, less suffering in their life. That's a real consequence that gives you a real purpose. So I think there is like an element of that to our current lives. In fact, I think they're infused with these purposes. As far as meaning is concerned, that's a little bit more iffy. And obviously, philosophers have various views about how meaningful our current lives are. So the meaning in utopia might be, I mean, more questionable, but some forms of natural purpose I think could persist. So if, for example, we care about, say, upholding various traditions, you know, maybe those traditions, in order to be upheld, requires humans to do various things. It's like not enough to design a robot that performs the ceremony or the ritual. Like that might not count as continuing the tradition in the same way as if we do it ourselves, or honoring our ancestors, our dead parents, or like etc. Maybe that requires you to be doing some of the honoring and remembering, rather than just building a machine that kind of replace some memory of them. And so you might think that, well, these natural purposes that I just mentioned, yeah, maybe they are there, but they're kind of very weak relative to the purpose that you will get kicked out of your flat and have to live on your street if you don't show up for work for long enough. Like that's a very real, tangible, immediate, hard consequence. These are more sort of nice to haves, but not really.
Learn this
and I think
better.
yes, that might be true, but if all the real, immediate, strong purposes disappeared, it might make a lot of sense to recalibrate ourselves to sort of be more moved by these weaker purposes that would remain. Just as like your pupils dilate when it's dark, so these weaker purposes, as you like, these kind of upholding traditions or various aesthetic purposes, there might be like the constellations in the starry sky. And they're always there. They're there right now, even though it's daytime. It's just we can't see them, right? Because there's this blazing sun of immediate imperatives that sort of blots them out. But even when, you know, the sun sets and all of the immediate, big, practical, urgent needs are taken care of, then why not let our sort of evaluative pupils dilate, and we can then be more impacted by the fainter light of these remaining purposes. I think that would make sense. And then we could find these natural purposes in these subtler values that would still require our participation.
I'm
Speedhang
deeply
actually
troubled by
helps a
this
lot.
idea of sort of,
I believe.
you know, taking the task of thinking about people and sort of giving it to robots or
When you
we think
need
they can
to,
think.
like,
It's sort of like, you know, at a wedding.
When you need to, how do I say that? Shift your muscle memory, so to speak. Like when I have to shift when I release here, when I have to shift when I click here, and how I click here, when I have to shift when I click, when I do the next click after this double click. I cannot really do that on one speed.
Or a funeral or something, you can begin to
speed.
employ these robots so that people are being, it's like, it's everybody knows it's nice when someone's thinking of you, you know, if you're sick or something, and maybe you've got a sick friend who's not that close to you, but you kind of care about them, but you're a bit busy, and so you can sort of, you know, pay for the on this website where it'll get this robot to think about them on your behalf for them, and they're actually thinking because they're really conscious, and you know, putting this off into a robot, I think that's definitely something that might exist in some kind of future dystopia. Okay, but perhaps I'm being too pessimistic. Perhaps you can describe, once the AI robots take over everything that we currently practically need to do technologically, what does a day in the life, do you think, look like for the average person? What is a day in the life for Nick Bostrom in the AI utopia?
Well, it might depend on when we take our snapshot. It seems to me that this utopian condition might not be a static structure, but something developing over time. And that we really should be thinking in terms of trajectories, optimal or what's the most desirable future trajectories, to say for each one of us, or for us together as a civilization, that we would want our future to consist of, rather than what's like the most desirable state, such that you like remain in that state forever, unchangingly. So it might well be, for instance, that if wishes were horses, if we like magically could get it exactly the way we want, that we would want to start out with some condition that is relatively close to the current human condition, but maybe with the worst forms of suffering eliminated, and people don't die. And then sort of gradually increment it from there. So rather than immediately transforming ourselves to sort of planetary-sized super brains that are like have these like immense cognitive abilities and emotional well-being pumped up to the max. Like maybe that's eventually where we want to end up, but like why not enjoy the journey there as well? So maybe sort of annually we'd gain a little bit more and life would become better and more perfected, and then maybe eventually that would lead to some place that is very strange by our current lights, and maybe we would end up being more like some sort of post-humans rather than humans. But we might prefer that to happen gradually, as like growing into it rather than sort of being immediately metamorphosed.
And in that weird place that we might end up, what are some of the ways in which you think human life might be different? I mean, I'm sort of imagining waking up,
Yeah,
and
you
in the
better
morning
do
you wake up,
this.
you get out of bed, you put your clothes on, you brush your teeth, you eat breakfast, maybe you get in a car and you drive your car to work, and you use the keypad to get into the office, and you walk up the stairs, or you press the button on the lift. I'm imagining that there must be ways in which all of these kinds of tasks, just the day-to-day, could be totally transformed in ways that we might not even be able to predict. And I wonder if there are any interesting predictions that you have about how our lives might change. The invention of the smartphone was completely unpredictable, and you never would have guessed that things like mapping out a route, before you go on a drive, become obsolete. Things like calling somebody to let them know that you're running late, that kind of thing, before you leave the house, become obsolete. There are things that you sort of wouldn't expect would even be able to become obsolete that have, and I wonder if you have any idea of what this future sort of down the line utopia might look like.
Yeah, I mean, so I think like the gadget dimension is relatively superficial. I think like what is more profound would be changes to our consciousness, our way of sort of fundamentally experiencing ourselves and the world, and the emotions that we experience. And I think ultimately that to really unlock that whole space of possibilities requires more than just moving things around in the external world. Like having your flying car and like even living in some palace with diamond, like that's not really gonna do it. Ultimately we need to change ourselves, I think, to really sort of be able to explore this much larger space of possible modes of being. And so I think it's hard for us to get the super concrete picture of what those modes of beings are, because they might require different basic capabilities than we have now, like cognitive capabilities, emotional capabilities, other forms of sensibilities. So you could sort of maybe make an analogy if you had asked a troop of great apes that were sort of the ancestors of the human species about the future and what they might eventually be able to evolve into.
Good girl.
And if you imagine that they could sort of talk, and then maybe they would imagine, like if we became humans, we could have like unlimited bananas, right? That would be great. And I mean, it's true, we do have many of us now unlimited banana. You can go to the supermarket and buy as many bananas as you wish, but there's kind of more to being human than that.
Yes, alright,
so we have humor and romantic love and television dramas and science and poetry and literature.
Alright, let's do the last thing, just play this level
philosophical conversations, and we have like all of these things. It's not like they just happened not to think of this, but they were sort of, our great ape ancestors were presumably just incapable of even imagining a lot of this that we now
I guess
the most valuable.
I guess it's a bit like trying to explain to one of these great apes just how sort of valuable something like a wireless
Get real.
iPhone charger is. You know, it's so
Get
it's so convenient to be
real.
able to charge my phone wirelessly. It's like just the
And I
kind of
don't
stuff
need
that
no clip limit.
even conceptually
Just
it is
look
it's
at me.
difficult to describe. And perhaps if people are right about the unimaginably transformative effects of AI, we're in an analogous situation to those great apes, unable to think about the wireless iPhone charger, and we're unable to think about some of these weird and wacky technological developments that AI has in store for us.
Yeah, but what we can do, I think, is kind of place a lower bound on how good things could be. But by just looking at, like, if we pick out sort of the best moments, the best days, or the best moments in human experience. So, like, at least we know that that's possible.
My brain, my brain disconnected. Oh.
In your life, if you have been blessed, like, even whether it was just like a brief moment, but like different forms of experience that just seem a lot more worthwhile than like a lot of the rest seem dross, maybe like the regular day in life compared to these glimpses that we can sometimes have of what is possible, and you might just realize at those moments how good life could be, and then it doesn't last, and maybe we even tend to forget about it, and we become kind of unable to hold on to that. But those are little embers that if we could keep those memories vividly in mind, it would give us some sense of the worthwhileness of trying to make it so that we could at least have that all the time, everybody, as a baseline, and then maybe there's like way better that we could achieve, but at least that would already be extremely
That was disgusting. That scream was disgusting.
working towards.
Oh.
And yeah,
Come
so I
on.
think and a lot of what would define those, I think, would more be maybe mental. A lot of those are like,
Alright, guys,
mental
that'll be
properties that I think that defines those peak moments in your life. Like a lot of
Let's finish listening to this part.
them have to
And
do with what you thought or felt or understood, or you know, maybe in some cases related to another human. They're usually not like, oh, I finally, you know, like even to the extent that we link them to some external event. I think if the external event hadn't also caused us to be happy when that happened, we probably wouldn't place that higher significance on it. So yeah, I think like the main dimensions here that would be relevant for human value are these kind of inward dimensions of in psychological space.
you just need to get Tsukuyomi. That's all you need in your life. That's all everyone needs in their lives. Alright, goodbye, guys.